Chapter 9. A One-Eyed Vision. Modern man talks of a battle with nature, forgetting that if he won the battle, he would find himself on the losing side. E. F. Schumacher. Our normal waking consciousness, rational consciousness as we call it, is but one special type of consciousness, whilst all about it, parted from it by the filmiest of screens, there lie potential forms of consciousness entirely different. No account of the universe in its totality can be final, which leaves these other forms of consciousness quite disregarded. William James, The Varieties of Religious Experience. So, we come to the present time where, in a secular culture, the rational human mind has established itself as the supreme value, master of all it surveys, recognizing no power, no consciousness beyond itself. It has lost its connection to soul, not only soul in the individual sense, but soul as a cosmic matrix or field, in whose life we participate. In its hubristic stance, the modern mind has become disconnected from the deeper matrix out of which it has evolved. With the passionate conviction of the iconoclast who cannot tolerate the existence of anything which threatens his or her belief, it contemptuously denigrates and derides everything it perceives as non-rational, labeling it as mysticism or superstition. This attitude, I think, points to my dream of the tower-like iron structure erected on the surface of the moon. It reflects the rigid stance of the rational mind or ego, which now stands like a tyrant over and against nature, over and against the earth, over and against whatever it defines as threatening to its supremacy, the achievement of its secular aims and its definition of progress. This leaves the neglected territory of the soul, a wasteland, as barren as the surface of the moon. From this brief survey of the solar era, which has, it is true to say, focused more on the dark than on the light aspect of this age, it is possible to see that the belief system of scientific materialism, or reductionism, which now dominates our culture, and which will be explored in this chapter and in chapter 14, can be understood as the end result of a long-standing disassociation of spirit and nature, mind and matter, but, above all, the sundering within us of thinking and feeling, rational mind and instinctive soul, the solar and lunar, conscious and unconscious aspects of our nature. Our psyche and our culture are now profoundly out of balance, and this fact is reflected in the mounting political, social, financial, and economic problems which confront us, and which have no solution if we do not, as Einstein suggested, change our way of thinking. There is a moment in a book called A Journey in Ladakh by Andrew Harvey, where he records the words of a Tibetan monk, Nawang Sering, referring to this time as Kali Yuga, the age of darkness and destruction. Nawang says that the great danger for the world now is the loss of spiritual vision, and that our task is to keep that vision alive, to see that it lives through these dark times. He speaks of the powers of love, healing, and clarity that lie latent within each one of us, and asks that we should strive to develop these, both for our own sakes and for that of others, and says that we will need to attune ourselves to the deepest levels of spirit, if we are to have a hope of surviving this era. Looking at the state of the world and the helpless, inarticulate suffering of so many millions of people, as well as our ongoing and interminable addiction to weaponry and war, it seems obvious that our current moral and spiritual immaturity threatens our very survival as a species. In the midst of this present darkness, how can we invoke the powers of love, of healing, of clear vision? How can we become aware of the influence of the deeply embedded beliefs outlined in previous chapters, and understand how they are still controlling us and contributing to the ongoing suffering of humanity? A one-eyed consciousness. Certain myths, ideas, or belief systems grow into meta-narratives, worldviews, or paradigms of reality, which can inspire, structure, and influence a culture for hundreds, even thousands of years. But they may also block our further development by subtle methods of control that are difficult to see. In the West, we have been influenced by two primary meta-narratives or stories: the Christian one of a transcendent creator God and a fallen creation, and the more recent scientific one, which says that we exist in an inanimate universe which is without consciousness, meaning, or purpose. Early in the 20th century, the French artist Odilon Redon painted a picture of the one-eyed giant, the Cyclops. Its single eye gazes out over a flower-strewn expanse, where a naked woman lies in a brilliantly luminous landscape. To me, the image of the Cyclops reflects the constriction as well as the inflation of the modern mind, which, unaware of the vast dimensions of planetary and cosmic life on which it rests, and out of which it has evolved, believes itself to be in control of nature and its own nature. It evokes Blake's much-quoted words, "May God us keep from the single vision and Newton's sleep." Yet the painting also communicates a tremendous sadness, the sadness of a one-eyed consciousness that is cut off from its ground, that has no relationship with soul and with nature, personified in this painting by the woman lying on a flower-strewn ground. The rational, or literal, secular eye stands lonely and supreme, alienated from the landscape of the soul. Since the 16th century, but more pervasively during the last 50 years, a secular worldview or philosophy has slowly infiltrated every aspect of the modern world, dominating the media, the arts, science, and philosophy, as well as economic, political, and educational agendas. It views life through an increasingly utilitarian and materialistic mindset, seeing no goal for humanity beyond the survival of our ever-increasing numbers and the improvement of material conditions through scientific, medical, and technological advance. By excluding, rejecting, and deriding so much, particularly in relation to the great spiritual and cultural achievements of the past, and the unanswered questions of the human condition, it drastically limits our understanding of ourselves and our place in the cosmos. It has turned its back on the whole unsolved mystery of our existence, on the great questions of who we are and why we are here on this planet. It even believes that our species has attained the highest level of mental development of which it is capable. What it fails to mention is the fact that our moral development as a species lags far behind our technological achievements. However, there is another kind of eye which has been called the eye of the heart or the eye of the soul, the flowering of poetic vision and the revelations of mystical and shamanic experience in many cultures over many thousands of years are vital reminders that we are entirely capable of a different kind of knowing, a different quality of relationship with what we call reality. The great sages of India, Tibet, and China, as well as the great mystics of the West, have known for thousands of years that we can access a deeper, more complete or enlightened state of consciousness than the one that usually engages our attention, a consciousness that is attuned to an unseen ground of being. 100 years or so ago, a man called Richard Morris Buck wrote a book called Cosmic Consciousness, in which he described the lives of individuals who have experienced dimensions of consciousness still unimagined and unrealized by most of us. He believed that the whole human species might one day attain to this state. Could this state of deeper knowing and experiencing, this capacity for a more profound relationship with life, be developed in all of us? And would this different quality of knowing enable us to experience a dimension of reality in which we are unknowingly embedded, a dimension that Plato once named the soul of the cosmos, animated by the creative agents of cosmic life, variously named in different cultures as goddesses and gods, demonic spirits, angels and archangels? Could our own consciousness, which includes the whole spectrum of experience between animal instinct and the highest potential of the imagination and intellect, participate once again in this greater planetary and cosmic soul, of which our culture has lost all awareness? Sometimes a single book can throw light on the character of an age and the changes that are in preparation for an age to come. In the early 1920s, Pitirim Sorokin, 1889 to 1968, was professor of sociology at the University of St. Petersburg. Sentenced to death by both Tsarists and the Bolsheviks, he was banished in 1922 and took refuge in America, where he became head of sociology at Harvard. There he wrote a book called The Crisis of Our Age, published in 1941. In it, he defined three different kinds of culture: the ideational, the idealistic, and the sensate. He saw the whole process of human history as a cyclical alternation between spiritual and materialistic cultures, and saw our present age as a time of one of the most significant and crucial transitions in human history, from one age to another. He identified the European culture of the last 600 years, particularly the last 400, as a sensate one, which succeeded and replaced the waning ideational culture of the Middle Ages. The focus of the medieval ideational culture was on spirit. The focus of the current sensate one is on matter and the phenomenal world. Spiritual values and belief in a transcendent, omniscient deity who created the world and man have gradually yielded to secular values and the belief that material reality and our sensory, empirical perception of it is the only valid focus for our attention and the only existing reality. Over the past 4 centuries, a sensate culture has become the dominant one and has seen a phenomenal scientific advance which has affected every aspect of our lives, writing, as he says, one of the most brilliant pages in human history. However, no finite form, either ideational or sensate, is eternal. Sooner or later, it is bound to exhaust its creative abilities. When this moment comes, it begins to disintegrate and decline. In the ideational culture of the Middle Ages, matter, the body, and sexuality were split off from spirit, seen as contaminated by the sin of the fall, whereas in our current sensate culture, matter, the body, and sexuality have moved center stage, and it is spirit which has been marginalized or eliminated. One culture excluded the body, the other has excluded spirit. In each case, a belief system was established and the system itself promoted as infallible. This totalitarian tendency in both religion and science is clearly discernible and can present a danger to us because of its unbalanced position. By ridicule, distortion, and neglect, our sensate culture has undermined the highest spiritual values and achievements of the previous ideational era. In Sorokin's view, our now decadent sensate culture had, by the time of his book, 1941, exhausted its creative potential and was, in the process of dying. He saw the calamitous ideological wars of the 20th century as a primary symptom of its decadence. "The present crisis," he wrote, "is not ordinary but extraordinary. It is not merely an economic or political maladjustment, but involves simultaneously almost the whole of Western culture and society. It is a crisis in their art and science, philosophy and religion, law and morals, manners and mores, in the forms of social, political, and economic organization, including the nature of the family and marriage. In brief, it is a crisis involving almost the whole way of life, thought, and conduct of Western society. More precisely, it consists in a disintegration of a fundamental form of Western culture and society, dominant for the last 4 centuries." Yet, in defining our current crisis, he did not feel it would necessarily lead to the disintegration and collapse of Western civilization. Rather, he believed that we were living through the difficult transitional period between the death of the dominant sensate culture and the birth of a new ideational one. He writes, "Even if it does not mean the extinction of Western culture and society, it nevertheless signifies one of the greatest possible revolutions in our culture and social life. We have the rare privilege of living, observing, thinking, and acting in the conflagration of such an ordeal. If we cannot stop it, we can at least try to understand its nature, its causes, and its consequences. If we do this, we may be able, to some extent, to shorten its tragic period and to mitigate its ravages." The secular worldview. Bertrand Russell, 1872 to 1970, described the secular philosophy of a sensate culture in this powerful and moving extract from his famous essay, The Free Man's Worship, published in 1903 and hailed as a landmark of early 20th century thought. That man is the product of causes which had no prevision of the end they were achieving, that his origin, his growth, his hopes and fears, his loves and his beliefs are but the outcome of accidental collocations of atoms, that no fire, no heroism, no intensity of thought and feeling can preserve an individual life beyond the grave, that all the labours of the ages, all the devotion, all the inspiration, all the noonday brightness of human genius are destined to extinction in the vast death of the solar system, and that the whole temple of man's achievement must inevitably be buried beneath the debris of a universe in ruins. All these things, if not quite beyond dispute, are yet so nearly certain that no philosophy which rejects them can hope to stand. Only within the scaffolding of these truths, only on the firm foundation of unyielding despair, can the soul's habitation henceforth be safely built. How, in such an alien and inhuman world, can so powerless a creature as man preserve his aspirations untarnished? How indeed? We can see how this philosophy came into being, but surely we should question its conclusions. Currently, the dominant philosophy of our modern sensate culture is the neo-Darwinian one that life on this planet has evolved by natural selection and the survival of the fittest, and that we are simply the product of our biological genes and our interaction with our environment. We are the products of mindless forces operating on inanimate matter. Atoms are lifeless particles, floating in a dead universe. Matter is primary and gives rise to mind as a secondary phenomenon. The secular materialist philosophy, which is spread from the West to every part of the modern industrialized world, can be summarized as follows. Consciousness is an epiphenomenon or product of the physical brain. There is no survival of consciousness after death, because the death of the physical brain is the end of consciousness. God is an unproven hypothesis, and the concept of the soul an irrelevance. The life of the universe came into being by chance. The universe we see, as well as the subatomic matter science explores, is inanimate and dead. There is no transcendent purpose or meaning to our lives. As Francis Crick, the co-discoverer of DNA, bleakly described us, you, your joys and your sorrows, your memories and your ambitions, your sense of personal identity and free will, are in fact no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and associated molecules. It is easy to conclude from this that the body is a mechanism that can be manipulated and controlled by the mind, and it also removes any foundation for moral values. This reductionist hypothesis, developing from a Newtonian, Cartesian, Darwinian foundation, and presented as truth, empties the entire human endeavor of meaning, purpose, and significance. There is no vertical access, nothing that might connect us to a field of consciousness that is beyond our immediate sensory experience. While I think it is true to say that reductionist science and the secular ideology that has developed out of it over the last 400 years has freed large sections of humanity from the absolute control of religious institutions, it would also seem to have replaced one rigid belief system with another. The main problem with this philosophy is that it excludes from discussion and validation anything that does not fit in with its convictions, in exactly the same way that the Christian Church, in its persecution of Galileo in the 16th century, excluded the new scientific discoveries. By devious means, it suppresses a mass of data that could be of immense interest, relevance, and value to our culture. This censorship is, in itself, unscientific. One example of this is the repeated attempts to disparage and invalidate alternative approaches to healing, such as homeopathy and acupuncture, saying that because their efficacy cannot be proven, they are worthless. The paranormal is also excluded, forgetting that Einstein presciently observed that the paranormal of today is the normal of tomorrow. Modern secular culture has exalted man as the supreme agent of his own triumphant scientific and technological progress, but it has also reduced him to the level of a biological mechanism, subject to the programming of his genetic inheritance. It has created a society that is obsessed with its technological prowess, fascinated by the digital revolution and the omnipotent power of science and the human mind. It has done away with any ethical foundation for values and acts as if technology itself could solve our problems, ignoring the fact that we are completely dependent on the planet's dwindling resources for our survival. It does not question the premises which direct its conclusions, nor does it look at the effects of its belief on children growing up in this morally defective culture. It could be said that we live in an unconscious civilization, as the Canadian philosopher John Ralston Saul describes it in his book of that title. However, this is not the whole story. What seems to be happening now in our culture is very interesting. Surviving elements from the older ideational culture, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, are in conflict with the prevailing materialist values of the current secular sensate culture, grinding together like two tectonic plates. At the same time, a new ideational culture is being prepared by those seeking to distance themselves from the rigidity of both the old religious beliefs and the modern secular ones. These individuals are motivated by an awareness of the urgent need to formulate values which could transform our present attitude to the planet from one of dominance and exploitation to one of responsibility and service. The challenge of climate change, with its potentially devastating effects on all planetary life, is intensifying the tensions, as well as pointing to the values and issues that were ignored in both the older ideational culture and the modern sensate one, namely, respect for the earth and the recognition that our lives and our well-being are inseparably bound up with planetary life. The meltdown in the financial markets from 2008 to 2012, the corruption of the banking system, together with the risky practice of borrowing or printing colossal sums of money which have no relationship whatever to what we are earning, has shown the fragility of a system that once seemed secure. The new ideology of a united Europe and the instability of the whole Eurozone is another factor contributing to this perilous situation, as are the spreading tentacles of the military-industrial complex in the most powerful nations. As the gap between those who manipulate and control the markets and the mass of people who are their hapless victims widens, the prospect of economic and societal collapse in different areas of the world draws nearer. But beyond all these is our relationship, or lack of it, with the earth. As Thomas Berry, 1914 to 2009, a Catholic theologian who, like Schumacher, was one of the most enlightened spokesmen of the emerging ideational culture, observes in his book, The Dream of the Earth, suddenly, we awaken to the devastation that has resulted from the entire modern process. In relation to the Earth, we have been autistic for centuries. Only now have we begun to listen with some attention and with a willingness to respond to the Earth's demands that we cease our industrial assault, that we abandon our inner rage against the conditions of our earthly existence, that we renew our human participation in the grand liturgy of the universe. The great adventure of our time. If we move from the secular ideology of science to the actual discoveries of science, it is a different story, no longer presenting a nihilistic view of human existence, but an ever-expanding trajectory of stupendous discoveries that engage our awe and wonder, like the beautiful glowing comet Hale-Bopp that we watched illumine the night skies of 1997. Something absolutely new is shining on the horizon of consciousness. In the last few decades, science has opened up an immense and thrilling panorama of the cosmos in which all our lives are embedded, helping us to understand its unfolding journey. Geologists and biologists have pieced together the story of planetary evolution. Cosmologists have defined the incredible story of the birth, expansion, and extent of the visible universe, although this is continually being revised in the light of new discoveries. Particle physicists are penetrating the unfolding mysteries of the subatomic world. Geneticists are applying the discoveries of the genetic code to healing the terrible diseases which still afflict us. Neuroscientists are making phenomenal discoveries about the human brain. They can map the brain and connect different functions with specific areas of it. To their surprise, they are finding that the more primitive, emotional parts of the brain play a vital role in developing the qualities of empathy, compassion, insight, and tolerance. But they cannot tell us exactly how the incredibly complex neurochemistry of the brain gives rise to perception, imagination, specific thoughts and feelings, and the collaboration between them. Scientists cannot yet answer the question of how consciousness arises out of matter. How, when, and above all, why apparently dead matter can give rise to life and ultimately to consciousness. And they cannot yet answer the questions, what exactly is life? And what is consciousness? So, for many millions of us, this is an intoxicating time to be alive, participating in the immense adventure of exploring the mystery of the universe, as well as the mystery of ourselves. The night sky has become numinous, as enthralling as it was to the ancient Sumerians and Egyptians, watching and noting the movement of the planets and constellations from the summits of their temples and the rooftops of their houses. Television presentations are riveting because of the brilliance and enthusiasm communicated by cosmologists, physicists, and biologists. One of the things that is changing our view of reality is the discovery of the immensity and age of the universe, as well as the incredible beauty of the galaxies recorded by the Hubble telescope, which is able to look back 11 billion years, 2 billion after the initial explosion of the universe, and is finding layer upon layer of galaxies as far as its eye can see. Now, the new Herschel telescope, launched in May 2009, is going even beyond the limits reached by the Hubble. All this is a marvel, and it has been brought to us by science. Who in this vast universe might be looking at us as we gaze into where we have come from in that dazzlingly distant past? According to the standard theory of the Big Bang, 13 to 14 billion years ago, as we understand time in our three-dimensional world, a stupendous explosion of cosmic energy took place, expanding instantaneously from a fireball smaller than an atom. The first second held the inconceivable energy that fueled not only the creation of 170 billion galaxies through billions of light years, paths of expansion, but also the evolution of life on this planet. Aeons later, out of this planetary life, the human species evolved, and ultimately human consciousness, our consciousness. The story of the evolution of our own species streams like the tail of a comet through the darkness of ages now inaccessible to us. The life of our species is embedded in the unimaginable old life of the universe, and closer to us in the life of this planet, yet, in relation to the immensity of planetary life, the lifespan of our species takes up no more space than the width of a hair. Complex life has evolved here through a truly extraordinary series of apparently fortuitous developments, which are only now revealing themselves to scientists. Lord Rees, the Astronomer Royal, argues in his book, Just 6 Numbers, that a mere 6 numbers determine the nature of our universe and define the actual fabric of material reality. The universe is tuned just right for life to come into being. Why should this be? The Milky Way galaxy that we belong to is part of an immense cluster of galaxies, the Virgo supercluster, that is 53 million light years away from us. In 2012, there are estimated to be 170 billion galaxies in the universe, and each one has over 100 billion stars in it. The Sun is estimated to be one of approximately 200 billion stars in our galaxy alone. These figures are being continually updated. One of the questions that most fascinates cosmologists is whether there could be life on other planets. Are there planets out there with beings on them who have developed a more complex kind of intelligence? Could we communicate with them? Would they have developed a more advanced technology than our own? Could they travel faster than the speed of light, and if so, how? Since 1995, a new generation of observatories, including Kepler and the gigantic telescopes that have been built in the Atacama Desert in the Andes, have revealed the existence of hundreds of planets in other solar systems. In 2009, NASA launched a new telescope called Kepler, sent off into space in order to find planets in the Milky Way that might be capable of sustaining life. In February 2011, NASA announced that Kepler had found 1,000 new planets, in addition to the 500 that had already been found. Then, in December 2011, it announced that one called Kepler 22b in the constellation Cygnus had been found that seemed to be a Goldilocks planet, because the conditions on it might be just right for sustaining life in a similar way to our own planet. Scientists think that there could be up to 10 billion Earth-like planets in our galaxy alone that could support life. Yet the life of our planet is so extraordinary that it is thought unlikely that there could be other planets whose formation is exactly like ours. Where the conditions exist for some kind of life, there could be entities like ourselves, with abilities and thoughts like ours, or with a consciousness so different from ours that we cannot even conceive of what it might be like. Incredibly, Kepler's lenses are so powerful that from space they are able to detect one of us turning on an outside light at night. If other, more advanced forms of cosmic intelligence were observing life on this planet and our calamitous effect on it, how might they communicate with us? Perhaps with the magnificent crop circles that have appeared in our summer fields for many years now, suggesting that there is more to be understood about our universe than we realize. Were it to be accepted beyond a shadow of doubt that these complex, beautiful, and mathematically coded patterns were made by an intelligence other than our own, it might produce the most radical shift in our thinking since the discovery of Copernicus that the Sun, rather than the Earth, was the center of our solar system. Some might recoil in fear, seeing extraterrestrials as threatening. Others might be thrilled to know that there was something utterly unexpected that could shock us into awareness of a different dimension of reality. See www.temporarytemples.co.uk. Vast and still relatively unmapped as it is, our observable universe is thought to be 93 billion light years across, but as yet there is no way of ascertaining how far it may extend beyond the reach of the perception of our instruments. It has even been announced in 2012 that it may be infinite in extent. Lord Rees suggests that it may be only an island in something resembling a cosmic archipelago of universes. In 2011, astronomers at the University of Michigan announced the discovery of a colossal black hole with a mass that is unimaginably 21 billion times greater than that of the Sun. Inside every collapsing black hole there may be another expanding universe that we know nothing about. Our own universe may have been born from such a black hole. String theorists hypothesize that there may be many universes parallel to our own, as well as many hidden dimensions in this universe. We only see 4%, some say 5%, of the total universe. 96% is invisible to us. Cosmologists thought that the universe could be slowing down after its billions of years of expansion. From supernova explosions that took place 10 billion years ago, they have been able to calculate how fast the universe has been expanding since that time. But they found that, far from slowing down, its rate of expansion was still increasing, so they wondered whether there was a force that could oppose and counteract gravity. They discovered something that they named dark energy, a force, 73% of the whole universe, that was strong enough to counteract and overcome all the gravity in the entire universe and impel it to expand faster and faster. They don't yet know what it is or how it works, but they do know that it is active on an intergalactic scale and does not, apparently, affect our Earth or solar system. Because dark energy is causing the universe to expand, there are galaxies beyond the cosmic horizon that we will never see because we are too far away from them for their light to reach us. Yet, with the equally mysterious dark matter, 22.7% of the whole universe, it has played a central role in how we came to exist. Dark matter is one of the great unsolved mysteries of cosmology, an invisible yet observable mass that seems to hold galaxies together, acting as a counterforce to dark energy which appears to push them apart. Dark matter emits no light or electromagnetic radiation, and its existence can only be inferred from the effect it has on visible matter. It seems that as long as these two mysterious forces, dark energy and dark matter, are held in balance, the universe maintains its equilibrium. All this is awe-inspiring. Yet one of the most amazing discoveries is that although we are between 13 and 14 billion years away from the apparent beginning of our universe, nevertheless we exist at the very heart of it. Every cell of our bodies, as well as every star, every galaxy, is the place where the universe is continuously flaring forth into existence from a great sea of being. We do not see the source ground, only its manifestations. Listen to the words of cosmologist Brian Swimme in his book, The Hidden Heart of the Cosmos. Even in the darkest region beyond the great wall of galaxies, even in the void between the superclusters, even in the gaps between the synapses and the neurons in the brain, there occurs an incessant foaming, a flashing flame, a shining forth from and a dissolving back into. We are not just in the universe. At the very core of our being, we are ongoing creators with the universe, participating, however unconsciously, in this continuously expanding process of creation. Even more astounding, the atoms of our bodies have been there since the beginning and are connected to every single aspect of it. That is surely enough to set the imagination on fire, even if we feel insignificant in relation to the unimaginable vastness of the visible universe. It is astonishing to realize that it took billions of years for life on this planet to evolve to the point where it could provide the atmosphere and environment that could sustain our physical organism and ultimately facilitate the development of the kind of consciousness we now have. The 92 types of atoms derived from the furnaces of the stars live within us. The chemical compounds that constitute all forms of life, from the simplest bacteria and molecules, live within the complex organism that we are. Each human body consists of 10,000 trillion atoms, connected to and cooperating with each other in complex and remarkable ways that are wonderfully described by the evolutionary biologist Elizabeth Sartoris in her book Earth Dance. Whether we are aware of it or not, we carry all this cosmic and planetary process of evolution and this tendency to cooperate in the cells of our physical organism. Every cell knows how to cooperate with every other cell to maintain our mind-body organism. Cosmologists have shown us that we are literally star life, star energy, star matter in every cell of our being. We are the only species on this planet to have conscious awareness of this. So are we the random creation of a mechanical, mindless universe, as the philosophy of scientific reductionism proclaims, or do we participate in the life of a living universe that animates and orchestrates its evolution from within its own cosmic and planetary processes? How can we answer this question until we understand what consciousness is, and the whole evolutionary development of the kind of consciousness we now have? We can only truly comprehend our history and ourselves through the lens of human consciousness. This lens may not yet be capable of giving us the full picture, however much empirical, scientific knowledge we may have. We are the only species on this planet that can speak, write, reflect, discover, create, and communicate with each other in words and gestures, and give expression to our imagination and our skills in beautiful artifacts, exquisite music, and brilliant technological inventions like the Hubble telescope. How have we come to believe that this entire creative panorama has no meaning? Our planetary roots. During its evolutionary course over nearly 4 billion years, our planet has survived 5 giant catastrophes which threatened to destroy all life on Earth. The best-known one being the devastating impact of a huge meteorite which wiped out the dinosaurs some 65 million years ago. But some 250 million years before that, for reasons not yet fully understood, the deep ocean conveyor current stopped moving, causing a lack of oxygen which nearly extinguished all life on Earth. The oceans turned stagnant and gave out a poisonous gas called hydrogen sulfide, as deadly as cyanide. Almost every living thing died on land as well as in the sea. This was the greatest extinction in the Earth's history. Over 90% of all life on Earth died. Yet incredibly, life survived these and other catastrophes and regenerated itself. It is truly astonishing that out of these successive extinctions and regenerations, human consciousness eventually came into being. But it is a sobering thought that, according to the biologist Sir David Attenborough, our species, if it continues on its present course, will be responsible for the 6th great extinction, which could include us. It is difficult to assimilate the enormous implications of his stark warning. The evolution of human consciousness. We are now living at the end of a great trajectory, perhaps 5 million years or more, which has brought about the gradual separation or differentiation of our human species from the matrix of nature and the development of a sense of self or individuality, as well as a highly developed intellect, everything that we now call human consciousness. But in the process, we have lost the ancient instinctive sense of living within a sacred order. The organism that we are, the vehicle of consciousness that we have, has evolved from the substance of the stars as well as from the life that developed on this planet. Complex life has evolved here through a truly extraordinary series of evolutionary developments, which are only now, through scientific discoveries becoming accessible to our understanding. In the child, consciousness arises out of the depths of unconscious psychic life, at first like separate islands which then coalesce to form a continent, a continuous land mass of consciousness. Was it the same with primordial man, as the capacity for self-awareness gradually evolved out of the purely instinctive consciousness of the animals? If so, the child recapitulates in the incredibly short space of a few months and years the phylogenetic evolution of the species, bringing with it as its inheritance specifically human instincts, as well as far more archaic ones, long predating the arrival of Homo sapiens around 40,000 BC. The faculty of awareness and perception that we call consciousness has evolved over thousands of millennia out of the matrix of instinct, ultimately developing into the capacity for self-awareness and introspection, the ability consciously to remember and to imagine, to observe and interpret, that our species now has, but not always have. Over these millennia, humans developed certain abilities and lost others, such as the acute sensory awareness of animals. Consciousness, the ability to be aware of an inner world of thoughts and feelings, as well as to observe and interpret an outer one, was not fixed in its present state 50,000 years ago. The focus of the modern mind is very different from, say, the Paleolithic mind of 50,000 BC, or even the Bronze Age mind of 3000 BC. Yet there are basic instinctive patterns of response to stimuli, basic patterns of behavior originating with the older brain system, that the human species has transmitted over an immense span of time, that it shares with other species, and which exists in us today. It is very moving to reflect on the immense age of this planet, where, taking an hour's walk, every large step represents 10 million years. Our human species appears in the last second of this walk, the final 2 inches of earth or grass under our feet, and human consciousness as we know it today, in perhaps the last millimeter or even less. Our physical brain, the vehicle of our consciousness and all the great discoveries we have made, has apparently arisen out of the evolutionary experience of the earth and all the species whose life it has sustained. But what evolutionary intention has programmed this emergence? Without our capacity to imagine, measure, deduce, and reflect and develop instruments to extend our powers of observation, we would not know that everything we are, everything on our planet, in our solar system, has been formed from elements of the stars that have been seeded here from great galaxies millions of light years away from us. We are, in our essence, literally, cosmic light, cosmic energy in every cell of our being. The small fraction of the universe that we see and the life that we are appears to arise from an invisible sea of light, which is the deep cosmic ground of the phenomenal world and our own consciousness. Within this sea of light, the forms change, but the energy is eternal, co-inherent with the source. Through the infinitesimal spark of cosmic light that is our human consciousness, the universe is becoming aware of itself on this planet, and at the same time, through that same consciousness, revealing to us the staggering complexity and splendor of its evolutionary process, telling us its story. I find this incredibly moving. We now know a great deal about the evolution of the physical aspect of life, but almost nothing about the inner aspect of both the universe and ourselves. That is to say, the consciousness aspect. Only that our species and our capacity for self-awareness have come into being very recently in relation to the time span of the Earth's evolution. Yet, this capacity is in itself utterly extraordinary, for without it the life of nature and of our own human lives would have gone unnoticed, flowing from an unimagined past into an unimagined future. Consciousness itself may be an expression of cosmic consciousness, something of which we are still unaware. Could the consciousness of our species evolve further? It is conceivable that as the great sages of India and the ancient tradition of Kabbalah have long taught, our species as a whole is still at a pre-conscious or semi-conscious state, with its further development unrealized because it is not even envisaged. We see things only in terms of technological progress. All the immense repository of knowledge that we have now accumulated serves the aims of a human mind that is still not fully developed and is not consciously in touch with its deeper cosmic ground. The triune brain. It may be a surprise to discover that we have not one but three brains. The great frontal dome of the neocortex, our most recently developed brain, rests on the primordial root of two older brain systems which continuously interact with each other, and also with the far more recently developed neocortical brain and its frontal lobes. Paul MacLean, who advanced this theory in 1974 in his book The Triune Brain, explains. A comparison of the brains of existing vertebrates, together with an examination of the fossil record, indicates that the human forebrain, neocortex, has evolved and expanded to its great size while retaining the features of three basic evolutionary formations that reflect an ancestral relationship to reptiles, early mammals, and recent mammals. Radically different in chemistry and structure, and in an evolutionary sense countless generations apart, the three neural assemblies constitute a hierarchy of three brains in one, a triune brain. Stated in popular terms, the three evolutionary formations might be imagined as three interconnected biological computers, with each having its own special intelligence, its own subjectivity, its own sense of time and space, and its own memory, motor, and other functions. So, we carry within us the evolutionary structure of three different brain systems: the reptilian from 500 million years, the mammalian or limbic from 120 million years, and the neocortical brain from circa 1 million years. The incredible complexity of how these three brains interact with each other and yet function as a single unit is still one of the great mysteries of neuroscience. How do 100 billion neurons, connected by 100 trillion synapses, communicate with each other? How do paths of cognition and behavior become established, and what could change these paths and therefore our habits of behavior? With great conscious effort and practice, we can become aware of which part of the brain is predominant in a specific situation. We know, for instance, that the fight-flight reflexes of the oldest reptilian brain spring into action, flooding the organism with adrenaline when we are faced with a threat or a physical challenge, and also that these primordial reflexes unconsciously govern many of our responses to everyday life, even though there may be no specific threat confronting us. We may spend more of our time trying to ensure our safety, compulsive shopping or eating, or anticipating difficult situations, developing weapons and preparing for war, than our actual circumstances demand. And we know that the older brain systems have a far greater influence on the more recently evolved neocortical brain than the latter has on the former. Powerful primal emotions like fear, anxiety, and rage, mediated through a part of the brain called the amygdala, can easily influence and even overwhelm the neocortical rational mind. We also know that adverse conditions in infancy and early childhood can negatively imprint the nervous system, the older brain, and inhibit the optimum development of the neocortical brain. A child so affected may remain fixated in the purely instinctive older brain, unable to develop the capacity for self-awareness, thought and reflection, and the ability to contain and control powerful emotions. The two hemispheres of the brain. We know that the right frontal lobe, which governs the left side of the body, is the oldest of the two brain hemispheres and the first to develop out of the actual heart of the embryo. It is fairly mature before the left lobe even comes into being. It seems that the close relationship between the heart and the right hemisphere is maintained throughout life, and that this hemisphere functions through image cognition, visual spatial perception, and mediating feeling states, rather than through the verbal, analytical, sequential cognition of the left hemisphere. The right hemisphere, tied into millions of years of the evolution of the Earth and of our species, is the image-making, holistic, non-verbal, connective system to the older mammalian brain. This right hemisphere, which may be the one that shamans and mystics can access, gives us a different perspective on life, arising from our age-old sense of an empathic relationship with our environment. It is through the right brain that poets, mystics, musicians, and scientific geniuses receive their inspiration, their intuitive flashes of insight. However, they need the verbal skills of the left brain to communicate their experience. Mozart's music flowed out of him in a torrent of incredible harmonies from the age of 4. Einstein's theory of relativity came to him when he was sitting on a hill, imagining that he was riding a sunbeam to the edge of the universe and returning towards the sun. The image came first, the theory later. Einstein himself said, "Imagination is more important than knowledge. Knowledge points to all that is. Imagination points to all that will be." It may be that the imagination, focused through the right hemisphere, is the illuminator of reality, the faculty that Coleridge held to be the very ground of our consciousness, of our capacity to think, discover, and create. The left hemisphere governs the right side of the body and does not have the same primordial connection to our distant planetary past because it evolved relatively recently. The left hemisphere gives us focus, direction, and the power to analyze, assemble facts, and direct our attention towards a goal, as well as the vital ability to speak and convey meaning. But although it is hugely advantageous to us from a survival perspective, it poses a problem because it takes us out of a state of being into a linear awareness of past, present, and future. When this hemisphere is too dominant and controlling, it can shut out the perceptions of the right hemisphere, and with it, the imagination and the vital connection to the heart, and the empathic skills derived from our mammalian inheritance. In a remarkable book published in 2009 called The Master and His Emissary, The Divided Brain and the Making of the Western World, psychiatrist Ian McGilchrist brilliantly explores the neurological discoveries as well as the specific skills of and the relationship between the two hemispheres of the brain. He shows how each hemisphere, in the process of evolving, necessarily developed not only different essential skills, but also different approaches to relating to the world, and how, over the last 4 centuries, the left hemisphere has gradually come to shape and ultimately dominate the secular view of reality, proclaiming that its view is the only one that is logical or tenable, and rigidly excluding any other view. The more inclusive, wide-ranging, and multifaceted perspective of the right hemisphere has been silenced. McGilchrist writes, "My view is that the two hemispheres, with their distinct versions of the world, each have something to offer, but that their relationship is importantly not symmetrical. The right hemisphere both grounds experience at the lowest level and makes sense of it overall at the highest level, while the left hemisphere provides an intermediate level of processing, unpacking the implicit, before it is handed back to the right hemisphere for integration into everything else we know. The trouble is that the left hemisphere's far simpler world is self-consistent because all the complexity has been sheared off, and this makes the left hemisphere prone to believe it knows everything when absolutely it does not. It remains ignorant of all that is most important." Another book, My Stroke of Insight, written by a neuroscientist called Jill Bolt Taylor, confirms McGilchrist's thesis, describing how a massive hemorrhage incapacitated the left hemisphere of her brain, and how she had the extraordinary experience of becoming aware of the totally different perception of reality that the right hemisphere, without the controlling, directing input of the left, revealed to her. It took her 8 years fully to recover all the physical and mental functions related to the left hemisphere, and she found through her own experience that the brain can repair, replace, and retrain its neural circuitry. She was able, with practice, to stay open to the perceptions of the right hemisphere and resist the attempts of the left hemisphere to reimpose its dominance and control. Given how extraordinary this is, it invites us to understand the nature of consciousness in greater depth. All the knowledge we have gained about the evolution of our physical organism, as well as its consciousness aspect, does not yet acknowledge that our present concept of reality might be limited to the view created by our literal-minded left hemisphere alone, disregarding or cutting out the more subtle and comprehensive vision of the right. Nor does it acknowledge the presence and influence of the part of the psyche that Jung called the root and rhizome of the soul. All the multi-layered memories of the entire evolutionary experience that we carry within us, memories of cellular life, plant life, reptilian, mammalian, and finally human life. This complex patterning of species consciousness, species memory or information, as well as species form, incrementally expanding and increasing over thousands of millennia, has contributed to the evolution of planetary life, the evolution of our species, and finally the evolution of 3 different brain systems, the differentiated functions of the 2 brain hemispheres, and human consciousness itself. What is consciousness? Consciousness is the ability to observe and interact with the visible world through the 5 senses, and simultaneously to hold awareness of an inner world of images, ideas, thoughts, and feelings. It also has the capacity to evaluate both these realms of experience, to make a distinction between what is meaningful and what is not, what is safe and agreeable and what is not. The triune brain gives rise to many integrated layers or levels of consciousness that have developed out of very archaic instincts over millennia as the triune brain evolved, adding in the neocortical frontal lobes the amplification of primordial instincts, gave rise to the possibility of cognition and self-awareness and the extraordinary creative power of the imagination, as well as to more specific emotions, empathic feelings, and intuitive flashes of insight or associations. Beneath the superstructure of neocortical consciousness, the subconscious workings of the autonomic nervous system maintain the balance or homeostasis of our total physical organism, supporting the continuous neuronal dialogue that takes place between all the different organs of our body, but particularly between our heart and our brain. What we call our rational mind is only one part of our total consciousness, while all around us, as William James observed, are other states of consciousness of which we are unaware. Among these is our dreaming mind and the realm of the collective unconscious. Our understanding of what comprises consciousness will need to be continually revised as we discover more. For example, Candace Peart's remarkable discovery of the molecules of emotion, 1998, which connect every part of our organism to every other part, has revolutionized our understanding of the interaction between mind and body, and done away with the separation that had long been established between them. As she explains in an article that followed the publication of her book, Molecules of Emotion, consciousness isn't just in the head, nor is it a question of mind over body. If one takes into account the DNA directing the dance of the peptides, the body is the outward manifestation of the mind. The new science of psychoneuroimmunology is redefining the connection between mind and body. We can no longer speak of body and mind as separate systems or entities. Body-mind, one word, no hyphen. Body-mind is a single organism pulsing with neuropeptide messengers that flow in a continuous loop from the brain to every cell in our body, giving rise to emotions and responding to emotions. Altered states of consciousness. The pioneering work of the Czech psychiatrist Stanislav Grof has shown that in altered states of consciousness, ancient fields of memory and ancient experiences can and do become accessible to our consciousness. His work, as well as the experience of modern shamans, such as those of Peru, shows that we can travel through these fields of memory. His experience during the last 40 years, using both psychedelic drugs and holotropic breathing in many thousands of sessions, has shown over and over again a similarity between the phenomena attributed to psychosis and those encountered in these sessions and in shamanic experience. As he writes, the phenomena originating at the perinatal and transpersonal levels of the psyche include sequences of psychological death and rebirth, encounters with archetypal beings, visits to mythological realms of various cultures, past incarnation memories, extrasensory perception, and episodes of out-of-body states. These have to be considered to be natural and normal manifestations of the deeper dynamics of the human psyche. He adds, but attempts to interpret any of these phenomena in the context of the narrow and superficial model of the psyche currently used necessarily leads to serious distortions and to pathologizing the entire spiritual history of humanity. From this perspective, the founders of the great religions of the world, as well as their prophets, saints, and eminent teachers, all of whom had visionary experiences, can be labeled as psychotics. Shamans are diagnosed as ambulant schizophrenics, hysterics, or epileptics. What happens to people whose psyche is open to visionary experience when a culture names this experience a mental illness? Current research is confirming that over 50% of people in the United Kingdom and the United States have what they call spiritual experiences, and that these add meaning and depth to their lives. But they often dare not speak of these experiences for fear of being thought insane. I would surmise that the greater the denial of the non-rational in a culture, or the more rigid a controlling belief system, the greater the incidence of psychosis, drug-taking, and addiction, because there is no container to receive and mediate this unusual kind of experience, or to help people to integrate such an experience within a wider framework of understanding. Are our extraordinary creative abilities no more than random expressions of the neurons in our brain, or is the brain a vehicle for the greater mind of the cosmos? Is the world perhaps the creation or manifestation of another primary dimension of reality, which contains it in the sense that this was explored in Chapter 5? Neurobiologists assume that the ability to imagine, invent, and discover, to appreciate beauty and to wonder, even our need for a god to worship, has its origin in certain areas of the physical brain, and that they are trying to pinpoint these areas and measure the neural correlates of specific subjective states. But our highly developed physical body-mind organism may also act as a vehicle or transmitter of a greater cosmic mind. For McGilchrist, consciousness pre-exists us and isn't created by our brains. Our brains simply transmit or transduce it. What gives rise in us to the longing to understand ourselves and to explore the life around us? Is it only a random neural cause giving rise to a neural effect? Or do our longings originate with the soul or mind of the cosmos itself, so that our longings actually embody and carry forward its evolutionary intention? The effects of our separation from nature. Developing a range of skills which are unique to our species has led to our present sense of self and individuality, as well as to our highly developed intellect, and our capacity to imagine, feel, think, analyze, and remember everything that we now call human consciousness. This evolutionary process has been, in our terms, long and arduous. In the course of it, we have grown to separate ourselves as observer from all that we observe, and have lost the ancient instinctive sense of participation in the life of the earth and the cosmos that our Paleolithic and Neolithic forebears knew. The more our mental and technological skills have developed, giving us the power to control our environment, and the more we have congregated in cities, the more estranged we have become from a sense of relationship and connection with the life around us. Modern city-bred children may not know that milk comes from a cow or bread from wheat. Now, with the life of the planet actually threatened by the demands of our huge and growing numbers, we are confronted with a situation that we ourselves, in our ignorance of the effects of our separation from nature, may have brought into being or, at the very least, exacerbated. On this planet, our lives are dependent on the lives of other animal species, and on the interaction of trees, plants, soil, water, and air. Yet, as a species, we are barely aware of our dependence on the extraordinary complexity of the planetary life that sustains us. James Lovelock's words are worth recalling here, because they sum up this relationship. So closely coupled is the evolution of living organisms with the evolution of their environment that together they constitute a single evolutionary process. No one has written more eloquently about the earth and our lost relationship with it than Thomas Berry in his book, The Dream of the Earth. No one has evoked in such compelling language the need for human sensitivity, compassion, and intelligence in our relationship with the earth and its living systems. He asks that we wake up from our mythic dream of progress and the dominance of nature, and take on the role of becoming responsible custodians of the dwindling species and resources of the planet. The competitive and exhausting industrial and technological culture we have created, where millions struggle to survive in enormous, ugly, and amorphous cities, stands like a tyrant over and against nature, over and against the earth and whatever threatens our supremacy as a species. Our human species, as a part, has become detached from planetary life as the whole. There is an abysmal lack of awareness that, as Berry points out, the earth is primary, and our survival is dependent on the continued integrity and balance of the earth's interrelated systems. He writes, "If the supreme disaster in the comprehensive story of the earth is our present closing down of the major life systems of the planet, then the supreme need of our times is to bring about a healing of the earth through this mutually enhancing human presence to the earth community. To achieve this mode of pressure, a new type of sensitivity is needed, a sensitivity that is something more than romantic attachment to some of the more brilliant manifestations of the natural world, a sensitivity that comprehends the larger patterns of nature, its severe demands as well as its delightful aspects, and is willing to see the human diminish so that other life forms might flourish. Precisely because of the long experience of separation from nature, we carry a deep and unrecognized wound. Our very being has been fragmented by the way we have interpreted reality, and by the values that direct our culture and, in particular, the materialist philosophy that currently directs science. Our conscious, rational mind has become disconnected from the part of us that, at an unconscious, instinctive level, possibly through the relationship between the electromagnetic field of our body and that of the planet, is still bound in close relationship to the greater organism of planetary life. This inevitably creates conflict between the conscious and unconscious aspects of our total organism. The end result of this long process of separation is that in our technologically advanced culture, we have lost something absolutely vital that earlier cultures still had, the awareness that we live within a sacred order. While indigenous shamanic cultures have retained this ancient participatory awareness, the modern industrial world has totally lost it. Astronauts of the soul. In a secular culture, attention has been focused exclusively on the daylight world of physical reality. There is no awareness, as there was in earlier cultures and in mystical experience, of the existence of a dimension of reality which might be compared to the starry night sky, a dimension which can only reveal its presence when the sun's bright radiance is dimmed. If we could break through the controlling influence of our left hemisphere consciousness, we could begin to play a more enlightened and conscious role in relation to the extraordinary cosmic drama in which we are all involved. Einstein knew that the problems we face cannot be solved from the same level of consciousness that created them. We need to evolve beyond our current one-eyed consciousness and reconnect with nature and the cosmos, with all that we have become separated from over the centuries of the solar era. We need to develop a new kind of consciousness in relation to planetary and cosmic life, summed up in the words of Stanislav Grof. I see consciousness and the human psyche as expressions and reflections of a cosmic intelligence that permeates the entire universe and all of existence. We are not just highly evolved animals with biological computers embedded inside our skulls. We are fields of consciousness without limits, transcending time, space, matter, and linear causality. I will return to this idea in chapter 15. There are brilliant pioneers now exploring the subatomic world, as well as the immensities of the visible universe revealed by the Hubble telescope, and there are others whom I call astronauts of the soul, who are exploring an unseen universe, whose existence is not recognized or even imagined by mainstream science. Just as we have the capacity to imagine, to think, and to feel, an inside dimension of thoughts and feelings within our physical form, so the universe may also have an inside to its visible form, an intelligence and a soul, perhaps related to the 95% of what we cannot see. Each planet, each galaxy, may have a consciousness, a soul. Shamanic cultures have known for millennia that we can develop the ability to communicate with this intelligence, to align ourselves with it, and to be guided by it. Western sensate culture has put enormous emphasis on the development of the rational mind and the advancement of scientific discoveries and the technology required to ensure higher material standards of living. The values of the heart have been neglected. The more feminine qualities of the capacity to relate to others, respect for the environment and acknowledgement of the deep mysteries of life have not been developed to the same extent. Because of this one-sided emphasis on the rational mind, the Western psyche is not fully developed, balanced and integrated. Intellect and technological skills have been developed to a very high degree among a small proportion of the world's population, but intuition and feeling have not been developed, and these two functions are asking for our attention now. We need to recover the shamanic eye that was closed long ago, so that we no longer have a one-eyed consciousness. A different perception of reality could reconnect us with nature and with soul, so enabling us to open the other eye and restore our fragmented being to wholeness. This perception could be summed up as follows. There is an invisible or transcendent order of reality out of which the phenomenal world arises. The universe is conscious, and there are many dimensions to it. Our human consciousness is integral to that greater consciousness, even though it is still partially developed or immature. Consciousness in some form survives the death of the physical body. What we have called spirit is continually creating life in the universe, our planet, and ourselves. All is one life, one energy. We participate in that creative dynamic. The soul is not confined to the individual. It is a vast web of relationships, connecting invisible fields of energy with the denser field of physical reality. The purpose of our lives on this planet is to learn how to live in conscious communion with the evolutionary intention of the cosmos. I will leave the final words to David Corton. Through the stories we share, we define what it means to be human, our place in creation, our responsibilities to one another and the earth, and the possibilities it is within our means to actualize. The issues are revealed with particular clarity by playing out the implications of two sharply contrasting stories. One story is that of a dead universe that assumes matter is the sole reality and consciousness but an illusion. That is the standard story of contemporary Western science. The other is the story of a living universe that takes consciousness to be the primary reality. This is a new story, emerging as a synthesis of ancient religious wisdom and the data of the scientific leading edge. And it potentially changes everything. Interlude. The Sleeping Beauty, a fairy tale for our time. Oh, awaken not the beauty until the time comes. The greatest fairy tales and stories are born like seeds across the generations, carrying us with them by enchantment, connecting us to the imagination that is too often banished from our lives. They suggest responses to the challenges of human existence that cannot be conveyed as simply or profoundly in any other form. Fairy tales are very old. They invite us into the mysterious landscape of the soul. They speak with the voice of the soul and carry many levels of meaning. Who can say where the story of the Sleeping Beauty originated and how it was transmitted from generation to generation? It may be descended from long-forgotten Bronze Age rituals, which celebrated the marriage of the sun and the moon, and others which mourned the annual death of the life of the earth, and celebrated its regeneration in spring. It may carry residual memories of the Gnostic myth of Sophia, entangled in the dense forest of our world, and her rescue by Christ. It may anticipate the awakening of woman to awareness of her value, and a different relationship with awakened man. It may also relate to our inner life and the marriage of our conscious mind with our instinctual soul. For the sacred marriage of king and queen, prince and princess, is woven into the rich tapestry of mystical traditions relating to our inner life, alchemy, Gnosticism, and Kabbalah. The fairy tale tells the story of a princess who, on her 15th birthday, explored the unused rooms of a castle and came across a room in which an old woman was sitting, turning and turning her spinning wheel. Asking if she too could spin, she took the spindle from the old woman and pricked her finger on it. At once she fell into a deep sleep, so fulfilling the curse placed on her by the uninvited 13th fairy at her christening, a curse that was mitigated by another fairy who remitted that death sentence to 100 years' sleep. The whole court fell asleep with her. A great forest of rambler roses, an impenetrable hedge of thorns, grew up around her, hiding even the turrets of the castle. 100 years passed by, and legends were told about the sleeping princess, who lay hidden at the heart of the forest, until one day a prince, hearing of the legend, determined to set out to find her. Many suitors had perished in the attempt to penetrate the hedge of thorns, but, so the story goes, For this prince the hedge of thorns turned to roses, and a way through the hedge opened before him. So he came to where she lay sleeping, and awakened her with a kiss. As she awoke, the whole court came to life, and preparations began for their marriage. For the best-loved fairy tales end in marriage. The ancient lunar imagery of the death and regeneration comes to life in the story. The dark phase of the moon is symbolized by the sleeping princess and the court, and by the old crone spinning in the turret of the castle. The solar prince awakens the lunar princess, the crescent moon, to life as his bride, and, as this happens, the moon reaches fullness and the whole court returns to life to celebrate anew the age-old marriage of the sun and the moon. Could this be a fairy tale for our time? Might its deeper meaning open a way through the hedge of thorns created by centuries of entrenched beliefs and habits of behavior? Might its lunar symbolism have the power to awaken our soul, nurture our poetic voice, our true intelligence, and our visionary imagination, and arouse in us a deeper capacity for relationship with each other and love for our planetary home? Finally, could it stir to life the slumbering court of humanity? Myths and fairy tales awaken and nourish the imagination. The imagination reconnects us to instincts which may have atrophied for want of use. And when this happens, the arid wasteland of our inner life may be regenerated by our immersion in the waters of the soul. When we are not in touch with the soul, it is as if a vital part of us is asleep. It cannot communicate with us, nor we with it. We cannot live to the fullest potential of which we are capable. A civilization may die because it has forgotten how to nourish the soul and the imagination. I see this timeless magical story as a metaphor for the need for a marriage between the solar and lunar dimensions of our being, a marriage between our head and our heart, between our too literal, analytical mind, which knows nothing of the deeper ground of consciousness, and our imaginative, instinctual, creative soul. This deep, instinctual part of us is the matrix of our ability to create. It is the origin of our capacity to feel and to imagine, and to give expression to feeling and imagination through the vehicle of our thoughts, our voice, our hands, and our body, which sustains the connection to a hidden dimension of reality. Feeling, intuition, and the imagination put us in touch with a ground which is beyond the reach of mind and intellect, acting like a plug connecting us to the socket of that deeper reality. But the hedge of thorns shows that an impenetrable barrier lies between mind and soul, and how difficult it is to get through it. The hedge of thorns symbolizes all the belief systems and defensive structures we have built up over hundreds, if not thousands of years. Deeply rooted religious beliefs about the nature of God and our fallen and sinful human nature, and scientific beliefs about a randomly created universe and dead matter. These beliefs, deeply imprinted on us over generations, stand between us and our soul, and make it almost impossible for us to reach below the surface of our everyday consciousness and listen to the voice of this lost dimension of ourselves. It is difficult for us to speak to each other as people spoke to each other in the past because of the fear of the non-rational, because of the rejection of this aspect of life. An essential part of our being is rendered speechless, autistic. Today we live in our mind, in what we believe is the supremely conscious, most interesting and powerful part of ourselves. Soul has been left out of the picture, yet I believe that in the story of the Sleeping Beauty, the prince and the Sleeping Beauty symbolize the two aspects of our consciousness which belong together as bridegroom and bride. The prince personifies the solar principle of consciousness, the questing human mind which seeks to explore, discover, understand, penetrate to the heart of reality, and who, in this story, is seeking the lost feminine counterpart of himself, that is asleep, unconscious. Yet, as long as he remains unconscious of her existence, and does not set out in search of her, as long as he does not confront and penetrate the hedge of thorns, she is condemned to remain asleep. The princess carries the lunar principle of the soul, and also the neglected feeling values which are undeveloped or inarticulate in relation to the rational mind, and have, so to speak, lain under a spell for centuries because of the beliefs explored in previous chapters. She also, more obviously, carries the image of woman who, for all the reasons explored in these, has not been honored for the feeling values she carries, and has therefore been unable to honor her true feminine nature. From still another perspective, the story can be seen as a concealed metaphor of the reconciliation of spirit and nature, or the marriage of the masculine and feminine aspects of spirit, which have become separated over the last 4,000 years. The story of the Sleeping Beauty says that at the right moment, for the right person, the hedge of thorns turns to roses, and a way opens through it. I think we are, in this new millennium, at the moment of breakthrough. A deep instinct is attempting to restore balance and wholeness in us by recovering the lost feminine dimension of soul, personified by the Sleeping Beauty. Over the past 50 years, a gradual restoration of a sense of the sacred has been taking place beneath the surface of our culture. Millions are awakening to the awareness of our relationship with the great organism of the planet, and beyond this, with the deeper field of the soul which unites all our lives, the great web of life that connects every aspect of life to every other aspect of it. This fairy tale anticipates our time, this precious time of humanity's awakening. Once before, in the 12th century, this was attempted in the great spiritual impulse of the quest for the Holy Grail. The mystery of the Holy Grail infuses the Middle Ages with the image of the age-old quest which turns inwards, following the yearning of the seeker's heart, seeking a path that cannot be taught, but only found, and is unique to each individual. The chalice, vessel, cup, and stone that are the primary images of the Grail evoke the archetype of the feminine, which becomes the inspiration, guide, and goal of the knight's inner quest. What is the Grail, then, but the inexhaustible vessel, the source of life continuously flowing into being, radiating into this world from the unseen realm of the soul, the realm in which all our lives are embedded? Who are the knights who act as guardians of the Grail, but those who faithfully kept alive through the darkened centuries the mysteries of the soul's awakening? Jessie Weston, who wrote From Ritual to Romance, one of the most authentic books on the Grail, said, "The Grail is a living force. It will never die. It may indeed sink out of sight and for centuries even disappear, but it will rise to the surface again and become once more a theme of vital importance. Now, as then, the Grail quest is open and can offer us a new image of ourselves, serving the world through love and following wherever the heart leads. For nearly 4,000 years, the soul has lain under a spell. Her voice has been silenced, her wisdom rejected. Beauty, grace, and harmony have faded from our world. But now she is stirring to life within the soul of humanity. What does she want from us? What is her hope? I believe she wants relationship. I see this relationship as a sacred marriage, a marriage between ourselves and the deep, invisible ground of life. The soul and the feminine archetype in their deepest sense have always carried the values of the heart, the values that honor wisdom, justice, compassion, and the desire to help and to heal. In many fairy tales, as in this one, there is the figure of an old crone, In ancient lunar cultures, she would have been recognized as an aspect of the goddess, just as the sleeping princess would have been recognized as another aspect. In modern dreams, often appearing as a figure in black, she still personifies the power and wisdom of the life process, which brings everything into being. She spins the web of fate. She is the womb of life, the process within nature which nurtures the seed and brings everything to fruition. In the story of the Sleeping Beauty, she is the secret presence in the hidden room of the castle of the soul, who brings about the events that lead ultimately to the awakening of the sleeping court and the marriage of prince and princess. She stands for the deepest stratum in our soul's life. No one who sets out on the quest for relationship with the soul can ignore her. Sooner or later, she may appear in our dreams, as she has done in mine, to awaken us to who she is and what she wants of us. Our brilliant technological culture inflicts intolerable stress on us because it grants no value to feelings and allows no time for relationship with the soul, no time to awaken to the presence of the extraordinary treasure that lies hidden within us. The rescue of the treasure, which has for so long been relegated low down on the list of our priorities, requires a fundamental transformation of our understanding of life, the formulation of a new worldview or paradigm of reality that will precipitate us through the hedge of thorns that holds us impaled in bondage to the past. It invites a reorientation in our relationship with the planet and with each other, a reversal of what we have considered important, even vital to our survival, a putting first what we have put last, knowledge of the holy unity of life, reverence for nature, trust in the powers of the creative imagination, in the atrophied faculty of intuition. All these are needed to help us recover that lost, instinctive relationship with life, which was once grounded in our experience of soul. The soul does not communicate primarily through words, through language, but through feelings, intuitions, emotions, and because of our neglect of it, through disturbed, violent, or addictive patterns of behavior. It also communicates through dreams. If we do not pay attention to these, there will be no way in which the needs of the soul can reach our surface consciousness that is focused exclusively on the external world. They will remain shut away behind a hedge of thorns. The journey in search of the soul is difficult and even dangerous because it requires that we relinquish the certainty of what we think we know and what we have been taught for generations to believe. It means surrendering the desire to be in control and opening ourselves to a quest, a path of discovery. Many myths and fairy tales emphasize the need for surrender and trust in the strange, non-rational guidance offered by animals or shamans on the quest. As the hero follows their guidance, so the hedge opens, the way unfolds. Following the guidance and the wisdom of the instinct is the royal road into the realm of soul. Somewhere in Chartres Cathedral, these words are inscribed: "Oh, awaken not the beauty until the time comes." This lost dimension of soul, which lives deep within our being and within all life, is awakening now. The quest to awaken the sleeping beauty is the quest for greater understanding of life's mystery. Those who say there is no mystery to understand literally kill their instinctive life, their soul, the supreme value whose discovery could heal the anguish, terror, and suffering endured throughout the odyssey of human evolution is to be found at the heart of our instinctual life. The fascination with the search for treasure lying hidden beneath the waters of the sea or buried deep in the earth reflects the magnetic power of the treasure that is hidden within the inner waters, the inner earth. Part 4. Recovering the Connection to the Soul. Chapter 10. The Resurgence of the Feminine. The Awakening of the Soul. Earth, isn't this what you want? An invisible arising in us? What is your urgent command, if not transformation? Rilke, 9th Duino Elegy. The last 4 chapters have described the pathology of the phase of separation and explored the reasons why we gradually lost the instinctive awareness that we lived within the sacred order of an ensouled world. They have described the causes and the effects of a one-eyed consciousness, a masculine consciousness that has lost touch with the soul. During this phase of separation, the feminine, once associated with the image of the Great Mother and the Great Goddess of earlier cultures, as well as with the soul and the neglected values of the heart, was relegated to the unconscious. This chapter, and those which follow, will describe how we are beginning to recover those values, and what factors are helping or hindering their recovery. The desecration of the anima mundi, or world soul. The effects on the world of the loss of the feminine, the loss of soul, are incalculable. Instinctive knowledge of the holy unity of things, reverence for the interconnection of all aspects of life, trust in the power of the imagination and the faculty of the intuition, all this as a way of relating to life through participation rather than through dominance and control, has almost been lost. We can see the effects of this loss of soul everywhere today, not only in the devastation and pollution of vast swathes of the earth, but in the unhappy, impoverished, and hopeless existence that people endure in the hideous and ever-expanding suburbs of our cities, in the increase of diseases like cancer, diabetes, and mental illness, particularly depression. The old are neglected and even ill-treated in a culture more interested in achieving targets than caring for people. The young are offered nothing to aspire to beyond the material goals promoted by the media. Women are degraded by having their bodies exploited to sell every kind of commodity. The human heart cries out for the return of beauty, for a place of sanctuary, for community and relationship, where the inner life is seen to be as important as the outer, and where a unifying sacred order to life on this planet is recognized and honored. In the wider context of the planet, forests are not cherished as sacred places, but are cut down to supply paper and packaging, or to establish cattle farms or crops to provide biofuels for energy. Mountains are hollowed out to extract the minerals needed to construct nuclear reactors, computers, and mobile phones. Areas of land are shattered by explosions, eviscerated and scarred to extract shale oil or gas. Military bases are constructed as launch pads for guided missiles on land that was once the sacred territory of people whose ancestors had lived there for centuries, for example, Diego Garcia in the Chagos Islands. The Arctic is pillaged to extract vital supplies of oil and gas. Animals are viewed in terms of the amount of food we need to feed our ever-increasing numbers, not in terms of their well-being. Vast tracts of Africa are bought to provide land for biofuel crops or food for the states whose own land cannot supply it in sufficient quantity for their growing populations. What does this pattern of exploitation amount to if not the crime of ecocide, with our species destroying the habitat on which all species depend? Ecocide leads not only to the destruction of the environment, but to wars over diminishing resources and crimes against humanity as conflicts proliferate. As this process has accelerated, nations have come to be viewed as markets to be exploited for financial gain, and if necessary brought to their knees by financial traders without a thought for the millions of helpless people whose livelihoods and lives may be destroyed. Politicians debate the radical cuts in expenditure needed to reduce the towering amounts of national debt incurred through years of injudicious borrowing and promises made to the electorate in order to ensure their re-election. Decades pass as men argue the pros and cons of climate change, and only a small proportion of the funds promised by governments to help protect the rainforests of the world reaches their destination. A charter for the Earth which offers an agenda for a different relationship with the planet exists, but governments and powerful corporations pay little heed to it. All this might be described as a desecration of the anima mundi, or soul of the world. A definition of the feminine.
Ever since I had the visionary dream of the cosmic woman, I have wondered what her message was. Why did such an image appear to me, and what was it asking of me? What, in its deepest sense, does the word feminine mean? As I am defining it in this book, it does not refer to the female sexual attractiveness that is so promoted in today's world, nor to the qualities of caring and gentleness usually, though not exclusively, identified with women, nor to the feminist agenda of the empowerment of women in a man's world. The word feminine stands for the soul and the unseen cosmic web of life that connects each one of us to all others and to the life of the planet and the greater life of the cosmos. It stands for the recognition that we live within a sacred order and that we have a responsibility to protect the life of the planet and all the variety of species it embraces, instead of exploiting them for the benefit of our species alone. In sum, the word feminine stands for a totally different perspective on life, a totally different worldview or paradigm of reality, and for the feeling values which might reflect and support that worldview. It stands for a new planetary consciousness and the arduous creation of a new kind of civilization. Without reconnecting to the soul and the guidance and wisdom of the feminine, without going in search of the values it represents and opening our own heart to its subtle guidance, we will not understand the purpose of our presence on this planet, nor will we be able to disempower the unconscious atavistic tendencies which draw us ever closer to the destruction of our habitat and therefore to self-annihilation. Like the magma of the Earth's core, the long-repressed feminine principle is rising to meet the masculine one in response to a deep soul impulse to balance and marry these archetypal energies within ourselves and within our world. The resurgence of the feminine invites a new planetary consciousness, where the deepest instincts of the heart in both men and women, compassion, informed intelligence, and a longing to protect, heal, and make whole, are able to find expression in ways that can best be described as devotion to planetary and cosmic life. Christopher Bache, in his extraordinary book, Dark Night, Early Dawn, describes this powerful new soul awakening.
The great difficulty I have is in describing the enormity of what is being birthed. The true focus of this creative process is not individuals, but all humanity. It is actually trying to reawaken the entire species. What is emerging is a consciousness of unprecedented proportions. The entire human species integrated into a unified field of awareness. The species reconnected with its fundamental nature. Our thoughts tuned to source consciousness. Awakening to the feminine means becoming protective of the whole of creation, dying to all the divisive ways of looking at life and each other, being born into an utterly different vision of reality. As it becomes more conscious in us, we are already becoming aware of our dependence for our continued existence on the integrity and sustainability of the planetary biosphere. Our image of reality and our relationship with the planet and with each other are being transformed as we assimilate the implications of this marriage of the two primary archetypal principles which, in Kabbalah, correspond to the left and right pillars of the tree of life. The return of the feminine has the impact of a planetary earthquake, dissolving long-established social patterns, political and financial systems, and religious institutions, asking for a radical transformation of our values, our relationships, and our understanding of life. I think we can find this new evolutionary impulse reflected in a drawing by Henry Moore, drawn at the darkest time of the Second World War. It shows a group of people gathered round a huge, shrouded figure, their smallness dwarfed by its towering height. Beneath the shroud and the ropes which hold it in place is a feminine shape. This drawing suggests that a new image of spirit, or perhaps a long-lost one, was stirring to life in the collective soul of humanity, waiting to be unveiled, waiting to be recognized and received by us. Henry Moore's greatest sculptures have the same feminine impress. His shelter drawings take us back to the maternal womb hidden beneath the earth, the cave-like underground passages where we sought sanctuary as bombs rained death upon our cities. Many of his sculptures and drawings focus on the image of a mother and child, or the monumental figure of woman. His work points to the resurgence of the feminine archetype in the human soul, and the global awakening of the anima mundi, or world soul. The resurgence of the feminine today. The theme of the lost feminine value weaves like a golden thread through the mythology, poetry, and literature of Western civilization, waiting to be redeemed at this present time when so much is at stake. Over the last 60 years, there have been certain events which have heralded a change of consciousness comparable to that which took place in 12th century Europe with the building of the great cathedrals in honor of the Virgin Mary, and the pilgrimages to the sites held sacred to the Black Madonna. This time round, though, the change of consciousness is not confined to Europe, but involves the whole world. Like a multifaceted diamond, there are many aspects to the emerging influence of the feminine. All are contributing to the healing of the long-standing disassociation between spirit and nature during the solar era. Each is intrinsic to a psychic impulse which might be called the recovery of the soul, an evolutionary impulse arising from the very heart of humanity, and perhaps even from the heart of the cosmos. I mean recovery in two senses. First, the sense of something that was ailing, diminished, or neglected being restored to health. Secondly, the sense of something of great value being recovered. The influence of the feminine is responsible for the growth of the environmental movement, for the determination of women in every culture to free themselves from their long oppression and encourage their increased participation in society, for the interest in the so-called non-rational, for many new approaches to healing both psyche and body. It is reflected in the mounting revulsion for our weapons of mass destruction, in compassion for the helpless victims of our addiction to war, in the engagement of hundreds of thousands of people in the work of helping both the planet and the victims of oppression. These different channels of influence are creating new perspectives on life, new ways of connection that bring together body, soul, mind, and spirit. All this is being accelerated by the connections between people facilitated by the internet and by online organizations like Avaz, which now has many millions of subscribers. The recovery of the feminine invites a reorientation of consciousness, a receptivity not only to the events occurring in the external world, but to the long-ignored voice of the soul. The activation of the feminine is helping us to relate to the deep cosmic source of our psychic life and draw up the living waters from those depths. This enormous shift challenges every aspect of our beliefs. It immeasurably deepens and broadens our perspective on our presence on this planet. It gives deeper meaning to our lives. It is changing everything. It may be that the new epoch we are entering will see the birth of a very different image of God or Spirit, a new understanding of the instinctive intelligence within the processes and patterns of nature, and how the unseen or inner dimension of reality influences and interacts with this physical dimension. This new understanding may help us to recover an authentic spirituality that takes us beyond religious and secular beliefs into a new sense of relationship with a sacred earth and an ensouled cosmos. From our work on the myth of the goddess and its last chapter that Jules and I called The Sacred Marriage, I know that this emerging phase in the story of our species could herald an evolutionary advance as spirit and nature are reunited, and humanity enters into a conscious relationship and partnership with life, seeking to serve it with insight, compassion, and wisdom. The signs of a change of consciousness. In his late work, Mysterium Conjunctionis, Jung wrote that the ultimate fate of every dogma is that it gradually becomes soulless. Life wants to create new forms, and therefore, when a dogma loses its vitality, it must perforce activate the archetype that has always helped man to express the mystery of the soul. In the 1950s, few people outside the Jungian community in Zurich would have connected a change of consciousness with the focus on the feminine and a recognition of the feminine aspect of the divine. The first indication of this change came with the discovery in 1945 of the Gnostic texts hidden for nearly 2 millennia in earthenware jars at Nag Hammadi in Egypt. As scholars began to translate and comment on these texts, it became apparent that certain Gnostic groups had worshipped God as both mother and father. Elaine Pagel's groundbreaking book, The Gnostic Gospels, 1980, brought these discoveries to a wider public. Her book was the precursor of a flood of books on the goddess, of which the myth of the goddess was one. This was one avenue through which the sacred image of the feminine was restored to modern culture. A second avenue was opened by the papal bull of Pius XII in 1950, which, in response to a petition from millions of Catholics, officially declared the Virgin Mary to be assumed into heaven, body and soul. A second bull in 1954 named her as Queen of Heaven, so restoring to her the cosmic dimension of the goddess that she held in the great civilizations of the Bronze Age. The new dogma affirmed that Mary, as bride, was united with her Son in the heavenly bridal chamber, and that as Sophia, wisdom, she was united with the Godhead. With these two bulls, the longing of the Catholic people beginning over 1,000 years earlier to have an image of the Divine Mother, a Queen of Heaven, in the Godhead was answered. Some 40 years later, in 1997, a further petition was presented to the Pope, asking that Mary be declared co-redemptrix with Christ. Although he died before this later petition was assembled, Jung knew that the two papal bulls reflected the fact that something of great significance was happening in the collective psyche, and saw them as the single most significant religious act since the Reformation. Mythologically speaking, the feminine archetype, including both body and soul, and personified by the Virgin Mary, was being raised to the level of parity with the masculine one of spirit, heralding a sacred marriage of the two great archetypal principles that would soon begin to find expression in the collective soul of humanity. The feminine dimension of the divine, so long denied recognition in a civilization dominated by the masculine archetype, would be included in the Godhead and restored to the position it held in the pre-patriarchal world. Nature and spirit, long sundered in human consciousness, would be reunited. The long and disastrous polarization between them would come to an end. Jung believed that this symbolic event, prefigured in the Renaissance in the many exquisite paintings of the coronation of the Virgin, pointed to the reunion of spirit and nature, and, within ourselves, the reunion of the dissociated conscious mind with the matrix of the psyche, the long-neglected instinctual soul. Familiar with the mythological history which had led to this moment, he saw this archetypal reunion as a new image of the sacred marriage, the ancient Bronze Age ritual which once celebrated the union of heaven and earth. He saw it as a herald of the great event awaited in the Jewish mystical tradition of Kabbalah, the wedding of the two long-separated aspects of the Godhead, the Holy One and his Shekinah, described in chapter 3. But it is not only the two papal bulls which signified a change of consciousness in the relationship between the two archetypal principles. People have been surprised by the popularity of Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code and the earlier Holy Blood, Holy Grail, co-authored by Michael Bagent, Richard Lee, and Henry Lincoln. The focus of these books was the relationship between Jesus and Mary Magdalene. Together with many other books about her, they have brought Mary Magdalene out of her long obscurity, acknowledging her as the first among the apostles of Jesus, as well as his close companion, possibly even his wife. From a Jungian perspective, the phenomenal sales of these books about Mary Magdalene reflect the power of a returning archetype, and the unconscious longing for the union of the masculine and feminine principles at the highest level, reflected in the close and loving relationship between Jesus and Mary Magdalene. The child, born of their relationship, signifies, in an archetypal sense, not the fruit of the bloodline of Jesus, but the birth of a new level of consciousness in the whole of humanity. The triggers for a global awakening of the anima mundi, or world soul. Looking back over the last 65 years, there were other events which contributed to this change of consciousness. In 1945, one of these was the shocking revelation of human barbarism in the discovery of Auschwitz. Another was the discovery of nuclear fission, the making of the atomic bomb, and the obliteration of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. These events separated the past from the future and made it clear that something had to change in human consciousness. We now had the godlike power to destroy ourselves, but not the godlike intelligence to prevent ourselves doing so. Then we were made aware of a different kind of threat. The biologist Rachel Carson was the first to sound the alarm in 1962 with her book Silent Spring. She drew attention to the interdependence of the human, animal, and plant orders of life, and the danger of contaminating air, soil, and ocean with the dangerous chemicals, DDT, that were at that time being widely and indiscriminately used to control insects. With this book, the environmental movement was born. In it, she challenged the scientific myth of the control of nature born, she said, of the Neanderthal age of biology and philosophy, when it was supposed that nature existed for the convenience of man. "It is our alarming misfortune," she wrote, "that so primitive a science has armed itself with the most terrible weapons, and that in turning them against the insects, it has also turned them against the earth." The furious anger and misogynistic contempt she provoked in the chemical companies who attacked her as more poisonous than the pesticides she condemned, revealed both the abyss of human ignorance about the interrelated systems of life on the planet, and also the power of entrenched attitudes to resist any change. Tragically, she died of cancer before the publication of her book, but long before her death she drew attention to the dangers of human interference with the balance of nature. In the preface to the 1961 edition of The Sea Around Us, first published in 1950, she warned of the effects of disposing of nuclear residues in the sea. In unlocking the secrets of the atom, modern man has found himself confronted with a frightening problem: what to do with the most dangerous materials that have ever existed in all the Earth's history, the byproducts of atomic fission. The stark problem that faces him is whether he can dispose of these lethal substances without rendering the Earth uninhabitable. Silent Spring initiated the birth of a different attitude towards nature. Under its influence, the idea began to come into being that we could not continue to act as if we were the masters of the planet. It began to dawn on us that the kingdom of nature is a seamless robe. We are part of this robe, clothed with it, nourished and protected by it. Yet, at the same time, because of the unique development of consciousness in our species, we are the only aspect of life that can become aware of the marvel of the planetary organism in which all our lives are embedded. We, therefore, have a responsibility towards it, a responsibility to safeguard and protect it. The awakening of a sense of relationship with the earth. Perhaps the most significant event for this awakening was the first view of the earth appearing above the rim of the moon, Earthrise, taken during the second manned mission to the moon, Apollo 8, 1968. Then the astronauts landing on the moon in July 1969, Apollo 11, gave us the breathtaking view of the Earth seen from space. 500 million people watched the Apollo landing and listened to Neil Armstrong's famous words. The technological feat of putting man on the moon was awe-inspiring in itself, but the very sight of the Earth seen from this distance was a catalyst that changed our relationship with it. For the first time, we became visually aware of the exquisite beauty and fragility of our planet, and knew it was our home in the vastness of the cosmos. It seemed so beautiful, so precious, and so vulnerable. Love of our blue planet awoke in our hearts. The words of Gene Cernan, the last astronaut to leave the moon on NASA's final mission, Apollo 17, convey the marvel of his experience for the whole of humanity. I stood in the blue darkness and looked in awe at the Earth from the lunar surface. What I saw was too beautiful to grasp. There was too much logic, too much purpose. It was too beautiful to have happened by accident. In the space of a few hours, our planetary eyes expanded to become cosmic eyes. In those few hours, the sense of expansion was extraordinary, as our relationship with the cosmos and our perception of ourselves was transformed. The fact that it was the moon that was being explored, age-old symbol of the great mother, the feminine and the soul, was in itself significant. But it was the sight of our planet from the moon that lifted us beyond national and regional allegiances and opened our awareness to cosmic consciousness and a sense of belonging to the cosmos. The mythologist Joseph Campbell gave expression to something that many of us felt. We are, at this moment, he said, participating in one of the very greatest leaps of the human spirit, to a knowledge not only of outside nature, but also of our own deep inward mystery, the greatest ever. He asked what the emerging myth of our time would be, and answered this question by saying that it would be a mythology of the unified earth as one harmonious being. On a later journey back from the moon, the astronaut Edgar Mitchell, founder of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, realized that his distant view of the earth was a glimpse of divinity. Gazing through 240,000 miles of space towards the stars and the planet from which I had come, I suddenly experienced the universe as intelligent, loving, harmonious. What I experienced during that 3-day trip home was nothing short of an overwhelming sense of the universal connectedness. I actually felt what has been described as an ecstasy of unity. It occurred to me that the molecules of my body and the molecules of the spacecraft itself were manufactured long ago in the furnace of one of the ancient stars that burned in the heavens above me. The awe-inspiring beauty of the cosmos suddenly overcame me. While still aware of the separateness of my existence, my mind was flooded with an intuitive knowing that everything is interconnected, that this magnificent universe is a harmonious, directed, purposeful whole, and that we humans, both as individuals and as a species, are an integral part of the ongoing process of creation. Books followed that were written from a totally different perspective and set the agenda for a transformation of our attitude to the earth. In 1972, Barbara Ward's Only One Earth, The Care and Maintenance of a Small Planet was published, and in 1979 a second book called Progress for a Small Planet, in which he laid out a plan for the care of the biosphere, and another to address the problem of global poverty. In 1975, Schumacher's phenomenally influential Small is Beautiful was published. In 1972, Donella and Dennis Meadows' Limits to Growth addressed the threat to the earth from overpopulation. In the early 80s, Fritjof Capra's two books, The Tao of Physics and The Turning Point, focused on the need for a transformation of our attitude towards nature and matter, grounding this in his knowledge of the science of quantum physics, which revealed life to be an indissoluble tissue of relationships, and the observer an inseparable part of what he was observing. The very title of the second book was a significant pointer to a change of consciousness. In that decade, we became alarmed by the threat of a nuclear winter, which could throw us back to the beginning of evolution, contaminating soil and water with the residue of nuclear bombs 100 times more powerful than those used on Hiroshima. Yet Einstein's prophetic warning was ignored. The unleashing of the power of the atom bomb has changed everything except our mode of thinking, and thus we head toward unparalleled catastrophes. Few governments consciously acknowledged the enormity of what they were willing to inflict on a helpless civilian population in order to ensure the survival of their particular nation. Each nuclear state was prepared to annihilate millions of innocent people and pollute the earth for generations in an exchange of nuclear missiles. For the decades of the Cold War, the tension between competing empires and ideologies powered the escalation of military technology, and as this developed on each side, it was extended to the Star Wars program and the race for military control in space as well as on Earth. Arguing that the bomb would act as a deterrent, those promoting the arms race did not acknowledge that in an exchange of nuclear missiles there would, as Jonathan Schell commented in his book The Fate of the Earth, 1982, be no victor and no vanquished. Both would be extinguished along with hundreds of millions of helpless civilians. The question now before the human species is whether life or death will prevail on Earth. No generation before ours has held the life and death of its species in its hands. In our present-day world, in the councils where the decisions are made, there is no one to speak for man and for the Earth, although both are threatened with annihilation. The nuclear disarmament movement, which grew into CND, was founded and grew rapidly. Many people, including myself, began to think in planetary terms rather than national ones, understanding that we had to transcend old habits, old patterns of behavior, if we were to survive as a species and protect the Earth. One example of this was the movement initiated in England in 1981 by Anne Pettit, which grew into the protest of the Greenham Common women against the American cruise and Pershing missiles. They called themselves Women for Life on Earth because, they said, these weapons go on killing silently and invisibly through generations as yet unborn. Increasing disillusionment with political and religious leaders and institutions was part of this awakening, together with the growing realization that each individual carried a responsibility, however humble, for challenging the dominant ethos of the culture, a responsibility highlighted by Jung's prophetic words, "The world today hangs by a thin thread, and that thread is the psyche of man." It is not the reality of the hydrogen bomb that we need to fear, but what man will do with it. These books, and many others in recent years, have made it clear that the fate of our species is inseparably bound up with the planetary biosphere, echoing the perception of Chief Seattle that whatever we do to the Earth, we do to ourselves. James Lovelock's book on the interrelationship of all the Earth's systems and his naming the biosphere Gaia, after the Greek goddess of Earth, restored to the world the ancient image of the Earth as goddess and mother. Thomas Berry, in his books The Dream of the Earth, 1990, and Evening Thoughts, 2006, insisted in uncompromising language that we wake up to what in our fantasy of progress we are inflicting on the Earth and its living systems. Just now, our modern world, with its scientific technologies, its industrial processes, and its commercial establishments, functions with amazing arrogance in its attitude toward the natural world. The human is seen as the supreme reality. Every other being is available for exploitation. The difficulty at present is not only that the individual nations see themselves and their own well-being as the ultimate referent as regards reality and value, but also that the human tends to establish a discontinuity between itself and the natural world. In this manner, the non-human world is reduced to being objects to be used by humans for their own purposes, rather than functioning as participants in a single, integral community of existence. Not only is the human community out of alignment with the functioning of the planet, but also the human community has become a predator, draining the life of its host. The environmental or ecological movement grew from the recognition of the threat to the biosphere from the industrial and chemical pollution of air, water, and soil. Friends of the Earth was founded in 1972. Greenpeace followed. 50 years have seen the foundations laid for a transformation of our relationship with the planet, and the emergence of many groups of individuals who are committed to trying to counteract the effects of human ignorance and greed. These form a new planetary entity, no longer national in character, but one which is held together by shared values and a shared commitment to implementing them. Paul Hawken's book, Blessed Unrest, 2007, collates the many facets of this new movement, and mentions the fact that as a result of his research over 15 years, he has identified what may be the largest social movement in human history. This movement comprises 1 million or more grassroots groups working to help the planet and to improve the lives of the oppressed and destitute and those, like the indigenous forest peoples of the world, whose survival is threatened by the predatory greed of the transnational companies. 38 organizations now exist to protect the Amazon region alone, and ever more strenuous efforts are being made to save the Indonesian and Malaysian rainforests from being cut down to supply cardboard for toys, or to use the cleared ground to grow crops for biofuels, or, in the case of the Amazonian forest, grazing for cattle to satisfy the voracious demand for beef. In this new worldwide collaboration on behalf of people, on behalf of the ecosystem of the planet, the foundations have been laid for the development of a contemporary image of man and woman as custodians of life. Custodians because the care of the planet is increasingly felt by many to be a sacred trust. All this has arisen out of the activation of what might be called soul or heart values, the desire to care for life and for our home in the cosmos. It is these values which are at the core of the emerging feminine, and are increasingly challenging the long-established values of power, control, and exploitation, which still drive the political and corporate agendas of the world. We are becoming more concerned to protect the delicate ecological balance of the planet, more aware that we are inviting our own destruction through our continued aggression toward each other and our blind exploitation of the planet's dwindling resources. Quite apart from this, the rapid growth of obesity with its attendant diseases on the one hand, and the increasing hunger and deprivation on the other, as well as the trillions of dollars wasted on weapons and wars, and the enormous debts now carried by many governments, are being recognized as unsustainable. The naturalist and biologist Sir David Attenborough has pointed out in his many television programs the effects of what we have unwittingly done, and are still doing, to the millions of species on the planet, and asked whether we are to be the cause of the 6th great extinction. He has warned us that never before has there been a challenge which involved the whole of humanity, and that all the environmental problems we face become harder and ultimately impossible to solve with ever more people. At the end of the last program of his series Frozen Planet, 2011, he urges us to take heed of what we have seen. The poles, north and south, may seem very remote, but what is happening here is likely to have a greater effect upon us than any other aspect of global warming. If the Arctic sea ice continues to disappear, it will drive up the planet's temperature more quickly, and the melting ice sheets could contribute to a sea level rise of a metre, enough to threaten the homes of millions of people around the world's coasts by the end of the century. We've seen that the animals are already adapting to these changes, but can we respond to what is happening now to the frozen planet? The Arctic ice sheet acts like a protective lid that regulates the Earth's temperature, keeping the climate stable. If it melts altogether, there is no protection from the effects of global warming. With regard to its extent, in just 1 year between 2006 and 2007, 1.5 million square kilometers of ice were lost in the Arctic Circle. In 2012 alone, more than 600,000 square kilometers have melted. About 4 million square kilometers of ice are left. All the great powers can think of doing is to compete with each other to lay claim to the oil and gas reserves to which the melting ice has given them access. It has now been ascertained that the gases created by scientists to replace CFCs, which were causing the decrease of the Earth's ozone layer, have had an unexpected and devastating side effect. They have increased global warming by 20%, yet they have not received the urgent attention they merit. Powerful interests are resisting banning hydrofluorocarbons, HFC, and perfluorocarbons, PFC, which are contributing to global warming, according to the Sunday Times of the 16th of September 2012. James Lovelock has described the catastrophic effects of our technological culture on the planetary biosphere, and has warned that during this century 6 billion of us could be wiped out by the effects of global warming. Both he and Sir David Attenborough have shown how life on this planet is an interconnected web of which we are a part, and which we can no longer exploit for our sole benefit. The aerial views of the planet, seen from space, show us beyond a shadow of doubt the effects of overpopulation and our industrial expansion on the land, the oceans, and the atmosphere. As the most powerful nations and corporations of the world compete for control over ever-diminishing water, oil, land for crops and minerals, none of them is reflecting on the effects that an increasing scarcity of commodities will have on the growing population of the planet, or the effect of that growing population on its diminishing resources and the planetary environment. Jonathan Porritt writes in the autumn 2012 edition of Resurgence magazine that we are already using 50% more resources than the Earth can sustainably provide, and unless we change course very fast indeed, even 2 planet Earths will not be enough to meet our burgeoning economic demands on a business-as-usual basis by 2030. The temperature of the oceans is changing and affecting the plankton on which multitudes of fish feed. The ocean is 30% more acidic than it was in pre-industrial times. We already know we are driving many species of fish to extinction, but are incapable of imposing the necessary limits for the stock to replenish itself. Shockingly, huge amounts of fish are thrown away dead because they exceed the quota. We can now see the shrinking glaciers of the Himalayas, the Karakoram, the high Andes and the Alps, the melting Arctic and Antarctic ice, the diminishing rainforests, the huge area of plastic detritus floating in the Pacific. The glaciers of Central Asia feed the great rivers, the Ganges, the Indus and the Brahmaputra, on which hundreds of millions of people and animals depend for their survival. Today, we are facing a choice, and the greatest challenge humanity has ever faced, a crisis that our industrialized culture and our ever-burgeoning numbers have brought into being, and of which governments as a whole are still only vaguely conscious and reluctant to address. James Lovelock gives us the unwelcome information that it is the breath of 7 billion of us and our dependent animals that is responsible for 23% of all greenhouse emissions, more than 10 times the emissions of all air travel. In 1820, the population of the world was 1 billion. In 2011, it reached 7 billion. By 2050, it is estimated to reach 10.5 billion at present growth rates. Living in an ever more crowded world, young people may not realize that the world population has trebled since 1945, yet there is no concerted attempt by Christian, Muslim, Hindu, or secular societies to suggest limiting families to 2 children so that parents replace themselves, but do not leave a legacy of multiple descendants. Since 1945, we have been faced with the growing danger from 4 new threats which were unimaginable 60 years ago. Firstly, climate change and its attendant problems. Secondly, the overpopulation of the planet, which is already leading to armed struggles for increasingly scarce food and water. By 2025, 3 billion people will be short of water. Estimate www.populationmatters.org. The problem is already acute in the Middle East, where so much water has been taken from the headwaters of the River Jordan that the river has become a stream. Climate change has reduced rainfall and left aquifers depleted. There is simply not enough water to support the huge numbers of people which, in some places, have doubled in 30 years. Famine affects tens of millions of people in Somalia, where constant fighting between a weak government and Islamist militants makes any long-term solution to the food problem impossible. Thirdly, the renewed threat of war and the massive loss of life and contamination of the planet that would result from the deliberate or inadvertent use of our weapons of mass destruction. Fourthly, the decreasing amount of land available to grow food because it is being appropriated to raise crops for biofuels. Large companies in the West, backed by the African governments, have designated huge areas of land in African countries for growing crops for biofuels, often seizing the land from already impoverished people without any form of compensation and paying them miserable wages for their work on palm oil plantations. This is from a report of Friends of the Earth 2012. If the temperature of the planet should rise by 2 degrees centigrade, it will make parts of the planet uninhabitable and drive billions to seek ever-diminishing supplies of food and water. China in 2011 had 5 years of drought, which affected its rice and wheat crops. Russia had a severe drought which destroyed the wheat crop in 2010. The United States had the most severe drought in living memory in 2012, affecting both the wheat and maize crops. Parts of Europe have also suffered from drought in some areas and torrential rainfall in others, both of which affect crops. All of these diminish the quantity and raise the cost of food. Yet still, governments pursue their national agendas and fail to think with a global sense of urgency about these issues. With survival instincts now registering on high alert, many people are challenging the whole power-driven ethos of modern culture with its rampant consumerism and emphasis on perpetual growth, and are searching for ways to halt the apparent headlong impulsion of our species and its unconscious political leaders towards catastrophe. The healing power of the feminine. As long ago as Bronze Age Sumer and Egypt, records detailed the charitable impulses to care for the orphaned, the widowed, and the sick. Today, apart from the thousands of charities and NGOs which have come into being to assist the millions in need of help, there is increasing pressure on governments to act ethically and with the welfare of the planet in mind. Thanks to television, we have a far greater awareness of the suffering of people all over the world. We participate through witnessing and empathizing with the suffering of people remote from ourselves. Wherever the call to compassion goes out, there is the voice of the heart, the voice of the feminine. The focus of the feminine is on the values that have been obscured, marginalized, or incompletely developed during the solar age. These values can never be recovered by force or even by strident demand. They can only manifest as human consciousness changes and facilitates their emergence. One example of the emergence of these values is the establishment of the International Court in The Hague, designed to try men and women who have been deemed to have committed crimes against humanity. Rape has now been designated a war crime. Leaders can no longer claim that the atrocities and acts of genocide they commit are in defense of their national interests. Because we are now, through television and the internet, witness to the immense suffering in the world, we carry the grief of millions in our hearts. Grief that so many helpless people are still the victims of conflict and oppression, autocratic rulers, drugs and trafficking, hunger and deprivation. Worldwide, we can collectively register outrage over the torture and murder of the 13-year-old Syrian boy Hamza al-Khatib. The threat to Sakina Mohammadi Ashtiani of being stoned to death in Iran for a courageous 14-year-old Pakistani girl shot in the face by the Taliban because she dared to speak up for women's education. In their treatment of women, certain Muslim societies today can be compared to Europe at the height of the witch trials, when women lived in fear of being denounced, tortured, and burnt at the stake. Our collective responses to these atrocities reflect moral progress in the world soul. A shocking report by the United Nations some 10 years ago showed that 22 members of the Arab League, with a total population of 280 million people, 65 million of whom are illiterate, have a lamentable shortage of the three essentials for growth and well-being: freedom, education, and women's rights. This report helped to light the fuse that led to the explosion of the Arab Spring in North Africa in 2011. A response to the feminine asks that war and the creation of weapons of destruction are relinquished, just as racism and conquests in the name of God or any other ideology need to be relinquished. If we can abandon our addiction to weapons and war, directing the trillions saved to feeding, educating, and caring for the children of the world, the result will be an infinitely better world and the possibility of our own survival as a species. We need urgently to challenge the arcane warrior ethos of governments, which demands continual preparation for war, selling arms for profit, and bringing devastating new weapons into being. As a new cultural impulse, the feminine is putting us in touch with the deep sources of our psychic life, drawing up from these depths the living waters which nourish and sustain the soul. It is creating a new kind of planetary morality, assisted by the internet and people on different continents drawn together by shared values and a common cause. It is encouraging people to overcome patterns of subservience established for millennia, helping them to throw off their bondage to oppressive autocratic leaders and establish democratic governments which serve their hopes for a better life. It is freeing women from centuries of oppression, enforced silence, and virtual slavery. The emerging power of woman. The image of woman has been through a radical transformation during the 20th century, which continues in this new millennium. The suffragette movement broke the spell of the belief that men were the superior sex, and opened the door to women in general to have access to education and to careers that had long been denied them. The First and Second World Wars and the arrival of contraception accelerated women's emergence into society after centuries of seclusion and oppression. A radical cultural revolution was initiated, shaking social attitudes to the foundations. The relationship between man and woman has been profoundly altered as women have emerged into the wider life of society, hitherto dominated by men, taking up careers in medicine, science, law, politics, and international affairs that were previously barred to them. The 2012 Olympics in London were an extraordinary event for women when, for the first time, all countries which participated in them included women in their teams, and they have triumphed in many sports formerly only open to men. But their new role in society is by no means complete or effective, particularly in the Islamic world, but also in the West. At the end of the Second World War, at the end of an essay on women in Europe, part of a larger book called Civilization in Transition, Jung noted that it was the task of women to bring together what man had sundered, and ended the chapter with these words: God himself cannot flourish if man's soul is starved. The feminine psyche responds to this hunger, for it is the function of Eros to unite what Logos has sundered. The woman of today is faced with a tremendous cultural task. Perhaps it will be the dawn of a new era. What then is woman's tremendous cultural task? It is surely nothing less than to free herself from oppression, persecution, and marginalization, so that her voice can act as an advocate for a new and better kind of civilization. United Nations Resolution 1325, passed in 2000, reaffirmed that women must be included in all aspects of peacemaking and peace-building discussions. The fact that this resolution has been effectively ignored humiliates women and shames men. The words of Michelle Bachelet, Executive Director of United Nations Women 2011, reminded the world that women's strength, women's industry, women's wisdom are humankind's greatest untapped resource. Educated and articulate women on every continent are awakening to a new role as advocates of justice for their gender, and also for the emerging soul values which have been so neglected and are so desperately needed. In many different parts of the world, individual women are speaking out with immense courage against oppression of themselves and others. Women like Aung San Suu Kyi in Burma, for years a prisoner in her own house, and freed in 2012, and Shirin Ebadi in Iran, once a judge in Tehran, now in exile, are challenging the cruel and oppressive regimes that wish to silence their voice and the voice of freedom. In these regimes, as Shirin Ebadi has said, women know that the victory of women's rights is the beginning of democracy. The answer to the question, what do women really want, asked by Freud early in the last century, is that women want themselves and their societies to live in freedom from fear, from hunger and destitution, from war and oppression. The world needs to hear the voice of women from every nation. Education and contraception have transformed the lives of millions of women, yet countless millions of others, through destitution, prejudice, or tribal custom, had no access to either. These live in abject poverty, victims of the brutality and neglect of men, used as sexual objects and, in Africa in particular, infected with AIDS by their husbands and partners. They struggle to keep themselves and their children alive from day to day, are forced into prostitution through poverty, paid miserable wages that barely sustain them and their children, and are unable to express their distress or find witnesses who will speak up for them. Contraception, which should be the right of every woman, is denied to them by religious prejudice and social custom. Women in Afghanistan and Pakistan, for example, risk imprisonment, torture, and death for speaking out against the oppression they endure in their misogynistic cultures, where they are condemned by tribal custom to a diminished life of servitude and suffering. Women in India are still being burnt alive for their failure to supply a dowry. Estimate 25,000 annually. Women widowed by war suffer poverty, neglect, and misery. Thousands of women in Syria are being raped and their children kidnapped, tortured, and murdered. Even in Egypt, where they participated in its revolution, highly educated women are not so far included in the drafting of new political institutions. And there is a danger in the newly liberated Islamic countries that the old habits of repression will be re-established. In so-called advanced societies with a high standard of living, domestic violence still blights the lives of women and their children. The plight of all these suffering women and their children is unacceptable in a world where communications are increasingly easy, where the pitiable condition of women and their children can be seen on television, where wealth and medical expertise exist, which could alleviate the suffering of so many. Woman's own awakening is part of the recovery of the feminine. It is as if a momentous birth is taking place in the collective psyche of woman. This birth may be experienced as something that is difficult and even dangerous, as well as something exciting and transformative. The planet needs women to challenge the current established political ways and deplorable struggles for power, and awaken the human community to a higher destiny and a different goal. It needs women to come out of the dark, to emerge into the light, to become visible and audible, to take the initiative in creating the change they long for. Aung San Suu Kyi, in her opening keynote address to the Fourth United Nations World Conference on Women in Beijing in 1995, made a memorable statement on the contribution women can make to a different world, a truly enlightened and balanced civilization. For millennia, women have dedicated themselves almost exclusively to the task of nurturing, protecting, and caring for the young and the old, striving for the conditions of peace that favor life as a whole. To this can be added the fact that, to the best of my knowledge, no war was ever started by women. But it is women and children who have always suffered most in situations of conflict. Now that we are gaining control of the primary historical role imposed on us of sustaining life in the context of the home and family, it is time to apply in the arena of the world the wisdom and experience thus gained in activities of peace over many thousands of years. The education and empowerment of women throughout the world cannot fail to result in a more caring, tolerant, just, and peaceful life for all. As a woman gives birth to herself, to her unique individuality, to the emerging awareness of her value as a woman, not an imitation of man, the feminine and the values that belong to it will also emerge in the consciousness of humanity. Woman, whose essential nature is to respond to suffering and need, is experiencing herself as a vessel of transformation in which a new global consciousness is being born. If we are to create a world that is not threatened, possibly even destroyed by the ongoing power struggles between men, women need to be proportionately represented in national and international government and on every organization and committee set up to address injustice, persecution, and human suffering. Matthew Arnold, the philosopher and poet, declared that if ever there would be a time when women would come together purely and simply for the benefit of mankind, it would be a power such as the world has never known. The Sufi sage Hazrat Inayat Khan said that he could see as clear as daylight that the hour was coming when women would lead humanity to a higher evolution. In 2009, the Dalai Lama astounded his audience at a conference in Vancouver by saying that the world would be saved by Western women. There is a saying by a great Hasidic saint, the Baal Shem Tov, which goes, "When the moon shall shine as bright as the sun, the Messiah will come." Woman, through her struggle to articulate the highest values of the feminine principle, will begin to make the moon shine so that it can balance the solar brightness of our present consciousness. In recognizing her depression, her suffering, her longing to outgrow the subservience and powerlessness of her past and present experience, in recognizing and supporting her deepest values and longings, she may accomplish something truly heroic and extraordinary for life and the planet, something that humanity in centuries to come will celebrate. For this reason, nothing is of more importance than woman's rescue of herself. The awakening of the soul. The resurgence of the feminine and the awakening of the soul are focused on the feeling values that have been incompletely developed, marginalized, or obscured during the patriarchal solar era, partly owing to the suppression of woman's voice that has been one of the characteristics of that age. These values can only emerge as human consciousness changes and allows them to emerge. The recovery of the feminine may be the key to the transformation of our world culture from regression into mass uniformity, banality, and brutality, into something longed for and extraordinary. This powerful evolutionary impulse, reconnecting us to our deepest instincts for relationship with each other and with the life of the planet, is working a profound alchemy beneath the surface of our culture. Women and men are participating in a process of transformation that is manifesting as a new planetary consciousness, a new cultural impulse whose emphasis is on the growing recognition of the interconnection and interdependence of all aspects of life. The arrogant celebration of man's conquest of nature is being replaced by the realization that if we are to survive, we need to respect and cherish the planetary life on which our lives depend. While on the surface the culture is focused on the superficial concerns propagated by the media, beneath it a new evolutionary and planetary imperative is being prepared by millions of concerned individuals. These new values are embedded in the Earth Charter, which offers an agenda for conscious and responsible action on behalf of the planet. They have also been beautifully expressed by the Prince of Wales, who has done so much to protect the equatorial forests of the world. In a paper he wrote some years ago called A Time to Heal, "As I have grown older, I have gradually come to realize that my entire life so far has been motivated by a desire to heal the dismembered landscape and the poisoned soil, the cruelly shattered townscape where harmony has been replaced by cacophony, to heal the divisions between intuitive and rational thought, between mind, body, and soul, so that the temple of our humanity can once again be lit by a sacred flame, to level the monstrous artificial barrier erected between tradition and modernity, and, above all, to heal the mortally wounded soul that alone can give us warning of the folly of playing God and of believing that knowledge on its own is a substitute for wisdom." Woman's age-old instinct to nurture and sustain life, and man's instinct to protect and defend it, are being extended to embrace the life of the Earth. A planet which has taken 4.5 billion years to evolve an organ of consciousness through which life can come to know itself, may be under threat. Our own survival is uncertain. Before too long, we may not be able to alter the course of events we have unwittingly set in motion. Yet, in response to the extreme peril of this situation, we are beginning to recover the forgotten lunar consciousness of a feeling of relationship with a sacred earth and a sacred cosmos. We are drawing together in closer relationship with each other, working towards the goal of rescuing this planet and the lives of future generations from our unconscious and predatory habits of behavior. The resurgence of the feminine and the recovery of the soul are reflected in these different initiatives. A growing sense of responsibility towards the planet, a recognition of the interconnectedness of life, a conscious effort to heal the soul-mind-body split, a growth of insight into where we are still controlled by unconscious complexes, the emergence of a different quality of relationship between men and women, a growing awareness of the suffering and needs of children, an awareness that we need to treat all species with respect and compassion.
There are 4 great questions that challenge us now. How do we recover our lost sense of being part of something totally sacred? How do we develop respect and compassion for the life of the earth in all its forms? How do we find ways of meeting the deepest needs of the human heart for love, relatedness, and connection? How do we relinquish the beliefs and patterns of behavior that have been so damaging to both soul and body, as well as to the planet. There are immense opportunities in this time of transformation, but also immense dangers. For the very transforming power of the feminine activates deep fear of change and evokes the response of reactionary forces which seek to reassert or maintain control over people's lives. We tread a path which is on the knife edge between the conscious integration of a new vision on the one hand and social disintegration and regression into barbarism, perhaps the virtual annihilation of our species, on the other. At the beginning of a new millennium, we are participating in the birth of a new era, one with radically different aims and values from those of the solar era. Mythologically speaking, this new era invites the marriage of lunar and solar consciousness and the birth of the child of a new kind of consciousness arising in the soul of humanity that will be the fruit of this union and the true savior of our species. It is a tremendously exciting, challenging, and creative time to be alive. This message was received long ago in the messages I mentioned at the beginning of this book. I record it here as it applies as much to our times as to those when it was received during the Second World War. A prayer of the Holy Mother. Gather my tears in your hands. Bathe your eyes in their sweetness. For in my tears lies no bitter salt. Rather like honey, or like dew will you feel them, as you take them to your face and heart. They are the tears of womanhood, shed for the cruelty and blindness of man. They are the tears of motherhood, shed for the useless death of her sons. Each time I see cruelty, greed, or senseless destruction, I shed these tears, hoping that they will melt the harshness and the greed of man. I weep when I see the gifts of life so shamelessly laid to waste. Oh, let my tears blind those who want to shed their brother's blood. Soothe those who are wounded in the battle. Melt the heart of Cain, ever ready to murder Abel. Oh, listen to my voice, and let the gentle sound of pity cling to your devoted hearts. These I will impregnate with the gentleness of my healing powers, that I hereby bestow on your hands, if you will give me your voice to the service of my cause.